Chapter 202. If a person made it clear that he wanted to kill you as soon as possible, then if you wanted to live, then the best way was to kill him before he killed you. Hanshaw and Florida had been at loggerheads from the start, and the matter of Phoebe had magnified this enmity. Not only had Florida made it clear that he had to kill Hanshaw early on, but he'd also made an official move. Hanshaw naturally wouldn't resign himself to his fate. It was now the latter half of the night after a day of pursuit. The bright moon hung high in the sky, looking down on everything below like a giant, icy eye. Strong, frosty winds blew across the towering ancient trees, scattering the thick ice and snow on them in all directions. Rustling sounds rang out incessantly. Hanshaw stood in the air with the demon slayer edge in his right hand. His expression was callous, and his gaze was resolute and emotionless. He was like a towering mountain, towering over Florida's path of hope. Florida only had hope of survival if he could get past Hanshaw. If you step aside now, I promise that I won't make an enemy out of you in the future. Florida's mental strength had been greatly depleted as he'd fled due to the backlash of magic. His injuries were now quite severe, and his strength was much weaker than before. He looked at Hanshaw with a bit of helplessness. Hanshaw's laughter was as cold as an icy cavern as he looked deeply at Florida and shook his head. "I'm sorry, I think that your promise will be more effective if you die." Florida knew that there was no way out after these words were spoken. His face hardened and he said darkly, "My grandfather is Grand Magus Ferguson of the Church of Light. There's no benefit in making an enemy out of me. Even if you can kill me today, my grandfather won't let you go in the future." Florida was obviously putting on a brave front when he said these words. With his strength, not only did he not frighten Hanshaw by using his grandfather's name to threaten Hanshaw, but it also confirmed that Hanshaw's strength was indeed much weaker than before. Otherwise, Hanshaw wouldn't have wasted time bickering with Hanshaw. "If I don't kill you today, I'll have to face both your grandfather and you. But if you die, I'll only have to face your grandfather. So, you should just die." Hanshaw said coldly and immediately began to kill. A pile of pure white bones appeared under the bright moonlight as Hanshaw chanted. They emitted a cold white light and quickly assembled to form a bone cage 3 meters wide and 4 meters tall, rapidly tightening around Florida. As soon as the bone prison was completed, the emotionless Hanshaw suddenly flew out and shot towards Florida like a bolt of lightning. Regardless of whether or not Florida's strength had been greatly reduced, he was still a light archmage after all, and he'd also trained in thunder magic. Hanshaw had seen everything clearly from his hiding place when he'd fought Edwin earlier. He knew that this person's strength was indeed very frightening. Therefore, the wisest course of action for Hanshaw, who had the advantage of magical yuan, was to close the distance between him and Florida. No matter how much strength Florida had left, Hanshaw was confident that he could quickly kill him on the spot as long as the two of them closed the distance. A shockwave of light magic was suddenly released with Florida at the center. Blinding light with the pure and holy power of light took the form of sharp waves and crashed onto the bone cage in front of him. Light magic had always been a natural counter to necromancy magic. The pure and holy power of light blasted over in the form of a shockwave. The originally gleaming white bones seemed to have been corroded over 100 years. The sturdy defense suddenly became so fragile that it shattered with a single blow from Florida's magic staff. With a crack, the bones shattered with a crisp sound. Although he'd walked out of the bone cage, Florida's face was even paler. It was obvious that he'd expended too much mental strength and had exceeded the limits of his body. At this moment, Hanshaw suddenly drew near again. The cold light of the Demon Slayer edge carried with it the determination to kill as it pierced towards Florida's neck. The magic staff in Florida's left hand suddenly exploded with white light as an enormous force erupted from within. Florida threw the magic staff out to meet Hanshaw's Demon Slayer edge. Clang! The sound of metal colliding rang out. Florida's staff, made of some unknown material, was pierced through by the Demon Slayer edge, which had been infused with magical yuan. However, there was a force contained within the magic staff that obstructed Hanshaw for a moment, causing Hanshaw to involuntarily pause in midair. On the other side, Florida had thrown away his magic staff. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth and flowed down his neck to stain his chest. His originally handsome face was now as pale as a sheet of white paper. The blood at the corner of his mouth made his appearance even more frightening as he flew towards the Valley of Sunshine at an unsteady pace. High-quality magic staffs could store a portion of the user's magical elements and release them at the most critical moment. Florida's actions just now had obviously been to make use of the last moment to detonate the magical elements within the magic staff and obstruct Han Shuor's killing blow. Perhaps he'd received some sort of message from the Cairo mercenary band's vice-chief. The berserker Harris was watching from afar with a few experts by his side. They'd long since seen the battle outside, but had only watched from the sidelines and hadn't come out to interfere. Everyone in Tanai was well aware of the enmity between the Cairo mercenary band and the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. As long as Florida entered Tanai, the Cairo mercenary band had the duty to interfere. However, now that Han Shuor and Florida were fighting outside the valley, with Harris' hatred for the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band, he probably wanted nothing more than for Florida to be killed by Han Shuor. Pausing for a moment, Han Shuor saw that Florida was about to charge into the Valley of Sunshine and that Edwin had reappeared behind him. Han Shuor immediately circulated his magical yuan to the limit without hesitation and transformed into a streak of light smoke in the air, shooting straight for Florida. Suddenly, a fire dragon soared into the air and exploded out of the Valley of Sunshine's fences, abruptly sweeping towards Han Shuor. Han Shuor had been planning on killing Edwin when he couldn't help but change directions and dodge. He first used the dark mist to move stealthily and then summoned a zombie as a target to unleash the fury of the fire dragon. Han Shuor looked down from within the dark mist and discovered that there was an additional fire mage at the fences in front of the Valley of Sunshine's gates. A group of knights on war horses and wearing the uniforms of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band were also quickly approaching. "Damn it, why are they here?" Harris growled lowly from the fences. Chief, are you all right?" The Rainbow Sickle mercenary band immediately surrounded Florida when they arrived and asked nervously. Florida, still in a state of shock, finally heaved a great sigh of relief when he saw that his people had appeared. He turned his head and pointed viciously at Han Shuor, saying, "Kill him." Florida's body went limp as soon as he finished speaking and he actually fainted. It looked like the repeated blows he'd taken along the way had taken a heavy toll on his body. The appearance of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band experts made Han Shuor understand that he no longer had a chance to kill Florida. However, when he saw that Florida had fainted, Han Shuor understood that although Florida hadn't died this time, he was on the verge of losing half his life. It was unlikely that he'd be able to recover in a short amount of time. Han Shuor, who'd been outside the valley, hadn't waited for the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band to make a move as he'd already shot towards Tanai from above, landing a few meters behind Harris. According to the rules of the Valley of Sunshine, even if you had the ability to fly through the air, you still couldn't use this method to travel between Tanai and the outside of the valley. However, Harris and the others of the Cairo mercenary band had clearly seen Han Shuor and Florida's fight. The enemy of an enemy was a friend, so Harris not only forgave Han Shuor's actions with great magnanimity, he also immediately waved his hands and led the Cairo mercenary band to stand in front of Han Shuor. "I'm sorry, but he's already entered the valley. You can't fight without permission in Tanai, or our Cairo mercenary band will definitely interfere." Harris' expression was calm as he gripped his double-bladed battle axe tightly, ready to make a move at the slightest disagreement. Chief Florida being heavily injured was an enormous blow to the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. Not only had their strength been damaged, but their reputation had also been damaged. The experts of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band all looked at Han Shuor with eyes that could spit fire. However, Harris had indicated that he'd do things according to the rules, so they didn't know what to do. Stabilize the chief's injuries first. They'll pay the price as long as the chief is fine. The fire mage who'd attacked Han Shuor earlier looked at the deathly pale Florida and suddenly spoke up. This person likely had a very high position within the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. The others didn't say anything else after he'd made this suggestion. They all glared angrily at Han Shuor and quickly carried Florida away. "Friend, you must be careful. Florida won't let you off when he wakes up." Although we have the Cairo mercenary band patrolling everywhere in Tanai, we still can't completely stop some people from causing trouble. I think you understand what I mean. Harris' attitude was much better than when he'd first met Han Shoror. The cold lines on his face had softened a bit as he advised Han Shoror. Florida's heavy injuries were of the greatest help to the Cairo mercenary band. As Florida's rival, Han Shoror was a friend of the Cairo mercenary band, so it was no wonder that his attitude was so friendly. The Cairo mercenary band would patrol everywhere in Tanai, but their energy was limited and they couldn't cover every single location. If the exasperated Florida were to wake up, he'd definitely take revenge at all costs with his personality. At that time, he'd likely make his move even in Tanai, so this place wasn't truly safe. Nodding, Han Shoror expressed his understanding and smiled faintly. Thank you, it won't be that easy to kill me. Edwin came over from the distance at this moment and landed on the fence. He stared fixedly at Han Shoror and said, I want to enter the valley, what procedures do I need to go through? Han Shoror's head started to hurt when he heard these words. If such an old monster came, he'd be a bit more of a threat than Florida. However, the Valley of Sunshine had its own rules and wouldn't reject the God of Fortune. Young man, you're called Brian? After so many years, there are fewer and fewer people who can harm me. I'll remember you. Edwin rubbed his back in pain as he processed the procedures and flashed a deathly pale smile at Han Shoror. The wrinkles on his face piled up, making him look quite fierce. Forget me, I don't want to see you again. Han Shoror responded with a wry smile and walked towards Tanai with a headache, thinking of a countermeasure. Edwin came from the Calamity Church and was a dark Grand Magus. He was a respected expert even in the entirety of the Profound Continent. If such a character hadn't been killed immediately, the troubles that would follow would be unimaginable. Han Shoror was currently having a terrible headache and wanted to immediately leave the Valley of Sunshine and use the transportation matrix to return to the Cemetery of Death. The night had unknowingly come to an end. When Han Shoror arrived at the Dark Mantle stronghold, Emily was still drowsy. When she saw Han Shoror appear in front of her, her somewhat dazed eyes gradually cleared up and she said joyfully, It's good that you're all right. Did you see Trunks? Nodding, Han Shoror said in surprise, How did you know Trunks was coming? The Dark Mantle still has some eyes and ears in Tanai. Trunks entered the valley alone not long after you left. When I learned that he entered the valley and understood that the two of you were very close, I discussed your matters with him. When he learned that Florida wanted to deal with you, he immediately left without another word and flew in the direction of Valin City. Because I needed to stay here and wait for news from above, I didn't go with him. Emily explained. Elaine's dead, and I was almost killed. Han Shoror sighed and said to Emily after sitting down. Hearing that Elaine had died, Emily's beautiful face suddenly revealed a hurt expression. She became completely silent and only sighed after a while, saying softly, although Sister Elaine doesn't know martial arts, she's very good at doing things. She's opened a small inn in Valin City and provided the organization with a lot of valuable information. I've helped her a lot, but we've caused her death this time. If Han Shoror and Emily hadn't appeared, and if they hadn't been in a hurry to leave Belinda to Elaine's care, Elaine wouldn't have been killed. However, Han Shoror didn't have a deep relationship with Elaine, so he didn't feel too much grief. When he saw the hurt expression on Emily's face, he went over and patted Emily's shoulder, speaking some words of comfort. Emily's mood improved under Han Shoror's low words of comfort. She then remembered the matter at hand and said to Han Shoror, just what happened? When Han Shoror recounted everything that had happened in detail to Emily, the many perilous encounters along the way caused Emily's heart to tremble with fear. She was happy for Han Shoror's escape, but worried for the danger that he was in. Emily was still a bit shaken even after Han Shoror had finished. She reached out to lift up Han Shoror's trousers and looked at the wound that had stopped bleeding. She said with heartache, don't take such risks in the future. If Belinda's arrow hadn't been in this direction, then wouldn't you have been in great danger? Don't worry, if the direction wasn't right, I naturally wouldn't have waited for death. I would have immediately turned around and fled as far as I could. His previous actions had been effective. Although the wound on Edwin's back wasn't as serious as Florida's, it would still cause him pain for a period of time. We're really in trouble now. Florida was already very difficult to deal with, and now Edwin has joined the fray. His status in the Calamity Church is very high, and he's even more vicious and cruel. You've even injured him. I really don't know if I should be proud of you or worried for you. Emily's brow furrowed as she sighed. Don't worry, we can return to the cemetery of death if we really can't handle it. As long as there's a place where no one can discover us and a transportation matrix can be set up, we'll be able to attack and retreat as we please. Han Shoror was quite open-minded and comforted Emily with a smile. The old man came over at this moment and knocked on the door, saying softly, Madam Emily, Chief Lawton of the Cairo Mercenary Band requests that you and Madam Bryan make a trip to their band. Understood, Grandpa Canby, Emily responded softly and then looked at Han Shoror. It looks like we might have an ally. Chapter 203. The sky was already completely bright and the air had become increasingly cool. The millstone-sized sun was slowly rising. The magnificent sunrise rose from the inky blue clouds, sparkling with a bright and gentle red light as it tore through the clouds covering the sky. On the streets in the early morning, Tanai's glorious sunrise was in groups of 2s and 3s, yawning with sleepy expressions as they walked out of the brothels in the shadows of the streets. It looked like they'd exerted quite a bit of effort on the women last night. There really are a lot of tasteless fellows out there. Emily wasn't in a good mood as she coldly glanced at the disheveled man walking out of the alleyway and said with a face full of disgust. Han Shoror didn't feel tired at all after a night of chasing. He looked around with interest and didn't respond. Oh, right. Phoebe came looking for you last night. I said you had some business and went out for a bit. Emily tightened the coat around her chest and turned her head to speak to Han Shoror. She didn't say anything. Han Shoror was slightly taken aback as he remembered what Phoebe had gone to do and asked. No, I don't think she had anything to say to me, Emily replied. She paused and suddenly leaned closer to Han Shoror with a bit of an air of gossip. She lowered her voice and said, Did you do that to her? Shaking his head, Han Shoror put on a serious face and said righteously, How could that be? We've only known each other for a few months. Am I that impatient? TSK, didn't you violate me on the first day you met me? And you even used violent methods. You shameless little scoundrel. Emily was quite disdainful of Han Shoror's response and snorted lightly. Han Shoror couldn't help but laugh when he heard her say this. He didn't feel awkward and instead opened his mouth to quibble. Our situation was a bit special back then. Also, you were a bit too tempting. How could I resist your temptation when I was young and full of vigor? Scoundrel, you only know how to speak nonsense. Emily was infuriated, but she was satisfied with Han Shoror's answer, so she didn't pursue the matter any further. Seeing the joy on Emily's face, Han Shoror knew that she wasn't actually angry. He suddenly thought of a question and asked Emily, Oh right, how did the Cairo Mercenary Band know about that place? Did they know that the shop was controlled by the Dark Mantle? Contrary to Han Shoror's expectations, Emily actually nodded her head in admission. Seeing Han Shoror's astonished expression, she finally opened her mouth to explain, the Valley of Sunshine is different from any other city in the Empire. The ones in charge here are the Cairo Mercenary Band. Add to that the fact that this place is limited, they'll interrogate anyone who enters. It's unrealistic to want to maintain privacy here. However, even though the Cairo Mercenary Band knows that we're part of the Dark Mantle, they won't interfere with our operations. This is because our Dark Mantle targets only people or matters that harm the Lancelot Empire. We won't purposely make things difficult for them. Brian. At this moment, Han Shoror and Emily heard Trunk's voice as they walked towards the Cairo Mercenary Band. They turned their heads and discovered that Trunks had appeared on the back of his manticore from the direction of the valley. There were still some indistinct traces of blood on Trunks and the manticore. The experts of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band that had fallen behind the man and beast had angry expressions on their faces. It looked like they'd suffered a bit. His sharp gaze roamed over Trunks' body, but Han Shoror didn't discover any traces of damage to his clothes. It looked like the blood on him and the manticore had come from the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band behind them. Are you all right? Han Shoror asked with a slight smile when Trunks arrived on his manticore. They're just a few useless traitors, how could they have hurt me? Right, how are things on your side? Did you take care of that despicable scum Florida? Trunks first responded confidently and then stared fixedly at Han Shore. Spreading out his hands and making a helpless expression, Han Shore sighed. He was rescued when he reached the entrance. However, I think that it'll take at least a month or two for Florida to recover from all his injuries. Haha, that's good. I came to the Valley of Sunshine this time to take his life. It looks like you've already done most of the work for me. I thank you in advance. Trunks laughed long and hard as he looked at the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band members behind him. Traitors, go back and tell Florida that I, Trunks, have returned. I must avenge Annie this time. He will die by my hand. The Rainbow Sickle mercenaries all had looks of hatred on their faces when they heard this, but they seemed to know that Trunks wasn't to be trifled with. They only snorted coldly and walked around Han Shore, Trunks, and the other two, heading in another direction. Trunks, why have you come to the Valley of Sunshine? Also, what enmity do you have with Florida? Han Shore finally couldn't help but ask at this moment. The merchants on the streets of the Tanai of the Sunshine Valley had already begun to rise, and the originally deserted streets had become a bit more lively. Trunks looked left and right, his expression a bit downcast as he said, "This isn't the place to talk. Let's find a place to talk and I'll tell you in detail." "All right." Han Shore nodded in agreement. "Wait a bit, Lawton of the Cairo Mercenary Band has an appointment with us. Why don't you guys talk in detail after we return?" Emily couldn't help but remind Han Shore when she saw that Han Shore and Trunks seemed to want to immediately find a quiet place to talk. Han Shore finally reacted after hearing her words and said apologetically to Trunks, "Lawton of the Cairo Mercenary Band sent someone to meet us early in the morning. He wants us to make a trip to the Cairo Mercenary Band. Why don't we talk in a bit?" Nodding in understanding, Trunks walked shoulder to shoulder with Han Shore and said confidently, "Let's go, I'm also looking for Lawton." "Let's go together. You know him?" Han Shore started and asked Trunks in surprise. "Of course, I also spent some time in the Valley of Sunshine a few years ago. I'm familiar with many of the people here." Trunks responded matter-of-factly. Emily revealed a startled expression when she heard these words and looked at Trunks thoughtfully. There were no shops or streets in the depths of Tanai, only some towering cliffs and some towering ancient trees that covered the sky. Trunks seemed to be quite familiar with this place as he led Han Shore and Emily inside. The terrain in the depths of the Valley of Sunshine is extremely precipitous. However, after passing through a narrow cliff, there's a large piece of flat land. That place has always been the residence of the strongest powers in the Valley of Sunshine. The Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band was stationed there a few years ago. If it wasn't for Florida's sinister plot to assassinate the old chief, the Cairo Mercenary Band would still be in another place. Trunks walked in and introduced the place to Han Shore and Emily. There was a Cairo Mercenary Band standing guard every few meters as they walked in. However, the distance between them was a bit far and the three weren't afraid of being overheard by others. "Right, Trunks, what kind of grudge do you have with Florida?" Han Shore couldn't help but ask when he saw that it was quiet enough. "Actually, I used to be a member of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band. I was still a senior swordsman and had always been taken care of by the old chief. The old chief's daughter, Annie, treated you like an older brother. My days in the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band were very comfortable. That was until Florida appeared. The young Florida had a dazzling radiance. He received special treatment when he joined the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band. Not only did the old leader think highly of him, even Annie admired him a lot. I also had a good relationship with him. However, Florida's goal in coming to the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band was to completely take control of it. Even though the old chief had already entrusted Annie to him, he felt that the old chief had lived for too long. In the end, he colluded with bandits and leaked our whereabouts, causing the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band to suffer heavy losses. The old chief died in the bandits' encirclement and Annie also went missing. It's likely that she's met with misfortune. I was lucky enough to escape and saw Florida talking to the bandit leader. Only then did I understand everything. From then on, I made up my mind to get rid of Florida sooner or later. It was a pity that after Florida took control of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band, He also invited a force from the Church of Light and took control of the situation in an extremely short amount of time, grasping the rainbow sickle mercenary band in his hands. Back then, I only had the strength of a senior swordsman and led some of the remaining soldiers loyal to the old chief in an attempt to assassinate Florida. In the end, we were routed and fled in panic. Many close friends died tragically in that battle. It was with the determination to take revenge that I snuck into the dark forest to train myself. I waited for 3 years and knew that the curtains to the next competition for the strongest powers in the Valley of Sunshine would soon open. I knew that Florida, unwilling to be left out, would surely compete with the Cairo mercenary band. I thought this was an opportunity, and so I came back. Trunks calmly recounted the events of the past. Trunks' expression was cold from beginning to end, as if he was narrating something that had nothing to do with him. However, the listening Han Shoror and Emily could feel the boundless hatred buried deep within Trunks' heart from the events themselves. When Trunks finished, Han Shoror looked deeply at Trunks and revealed a radiant smile. "It looks like we can join forces again. I think Florida will die without a doubt this time." "Of course, he will," Trunks said confidently, and then looked at Emily with interest, then looked at Han Shoror. He asked with a strange expression, "What's going on with you two? If I remember correctly, you captured this lady alive back then. Why are you two together now?" Chuckling loudly, Han Shoror winked at Trunks and said, "Sometimes it's very easy for enemies to become friends, especially between men and women. I understand, haha." Trunks laughed involuntarily and nodded in understanding. "You two crazy fellows." Emily was a bit embarrassed by their words. She rolled her eyes at them and snorted angrily. As they chatted and laughed, they passed through the narrow cliff and arrived at a wide, flat area. This area was mainly made of dark green rocks, piled up into many tall buildings. These buildings weren't particularly exquisite or beautiful, but were completely practical. They looked thick and sturdy, as if they were very resistant to attacks. On the way to those buildings, there was a spacious training field. Dozens of muscular mercenaries were training with all kinds of weapons. In a dense forest not far away, several mags were casting magic, and some people were meditating even further away. This place is large enough and the buildings are sturdy enough. Because there's only one natural stronghold that leads here, it's very safe. It's been the last line of defense in the Valley of Sunshine for many years. Trunks explained to Han Shoror and Emily as they walked. "Hey, Trunks, why are you back?" Harris of the Cairo mercenary band was standing at the entrance of the square in high spirits, as if he'd been waiting for Han Shoror and the others. He was obviously very surprised when he saw Trunks and couldn't help but exclaim softly, "Harris, it's been a long time since I've seen you. You look even more sturdy than before. But Florida has been doing quite well these past few years. It looks like you haven't taken your revenge yet." Trunks had a hint of ridicule on his face as he spoke to Harris from afar. "Mph, didn't you also run away with serious injuries? What right do you have to talk to me?" Harris' expression was stiff as he shouted angrily, "Forget it, I have nothing to say to you. Let's go, take me to see Lawton." Trunks frowned and curled his lips, urging Harris to lead the way. After crossing the square, Harris brought the three of them to a huge building. Loud rumbling sounds came from the building in the distance. When Han Shoror and the other two walked in, they couldn't help but be astonished by the scene in front of them. A bald, burly man with a height of more than 2 meters had half of his body exposed. He was only wearing a pair of shorts. The muscles on his body bulged and were as hard as iron and stone. The blue veins all over his body were pulsating, full of terrifying explosive power. There was a small mountain of dark green rock on his back. The rock was 3 times the size of his body, and he quickly retreated with the rock on his back. His body and the rock crashed into a stone pillar so thick that it would take 3 people to wrap their arms around it, making a deafening rumbling sound. Sweat trickled down his body, flowing along the lines of his muscles. His dark skin shone with a healthy luster, and his bald head, without a single strand of hair, glistened with a glossy sheen. Amidst the rumbling sounds of collisions, the burly man's body trembled repeatedly. The wide stone pillar behind him made catcha-bang sounds, and the entire building seemed to be trembling under the violent collisions, making people worry that the building would collapse at any moment. When the three of them arrived, he slammed against the wall 5 times in a row before finally throwing the boulder on his body to the side with a loud rumble. The entire ground trembled as if there was an earthquake, and the loud rumbling reverberated throughout the building. When Han-Shoror and the other two arrived, the burly man slammed into the pillar 5 times before finally throwing the rock on his back to the side. The entire ground trembled as if there was an earthquake, and the loud rumbling sounds lingered in the building. Han-Shoror's heart couldn't help but tremble as he knew that the strength of this person's physical body had already reached an astonishing level. "Trunks, why have you come back?" The burly man's eyes shone with a strange light as he looked at Trunks in astonishment. "Lawton, it's been a few years since we've seen each other. It looks like your physical body has already been tempered to the extreme. You could already go berserk twice before, and it looks like you've gone up another level now. I wonder if you can go berserk thrice and reach the legendary 3 strong levels of the berserkers." Trunks revealed an expression of interest as he stared at Lawton. Revealing a strange smile, Lawton didn't respond to Trunks' question and focused his attention on Han-Shoror, saying, "You're the one who almost killed Florida?" Nodding, Han-Shoror said with a smile, "Indeed. What instructions do you have for me, Chief Lawton? I'd like to discuss a business deal with you, but you'll have to take a punch from me first. Let me measure your strength and see if you're worth it for me to hand over that shop to you." Lawton laughed loudly as his fan-sized fist smashed towards Han-Shoror's head with a forceful, domineering aura. Han-Shoror was slightly startled, and then discovered that the punch had already arrived in front of him. The berserk power contained within made Han-Shoror pale with fright. What surprised Han-Shoror even more was that this surge of power sealed off all of Han-Shoror's paths of retreat, giving him no chance of dodging at all. Han-Shoror's face was aghast as he immediately focused all of his attention and circulated his magical yuan to the limit, planning on taking this punch head-on. Chapter 204. The iron fist that could split mountains and split rocks came crashing down, the ferocious force causing the air to crackle. The boundless dominance that was like a torrential river made all the pores on Han-Shoror's skin stand on end. Han-Shoror took a deep breath and circulated his magical yuan to his right hand. When he activated his magical yuan to the limit, Han-Shoror's right hand actually turned the color of black jade. Pure white bones were embedded in his jade-like right hand, sparkling with a faint light. A cloud of purple magical energy curled around the center of his right palm, giving off the appearance of a raging flame. Trunks and Emily, who'd been shocked out of their wits and about to intervene, froze in place and shut their mouths when they saw Han-Shoror's right hand suddenly change. When Han-Shoror's right hand changed, Han-Shoror, who'd been in a defensive position, suddenly darted out with lightning speed. He then pulled his right hand back and a bolt of purple lightning suddenly appeared, violently striking Lawton's fist. An ear-splitting boom rang out, even louder than when Lawton had struck the pillar with the boulder. The entire hall reverberated with this enormous sound. A force that could topple mountains and overturn the seas suddenly surged madly from his right hand into Han-Shoror's body. The strength of this force was beyond Han-Shoror's imagination. If it wasn't for the fact that Han-Shoror's body was also abnormally tough, Han-Shoror's right fist would have exploded into pieces upon contact. Even so, Han-Shoror's body still couldn't help but fly backwards and fall towards the door of the hall. He crashed into the dark green rock with a crack, his body falling limply to the ground. Chief Lawton of the Cairo mercenary band didn't move an inch with his rock-solid body, but an icy aura spread from his fist to his entire body, causing the trickling sweat on his body to instantly turn into translucent beads of sweat. White smoke quickly rose from his body as the cold aura enveloped him. "Are you all right?" Emily moved quickly and arrived in front of Han-Shoror in the blink of an eye. She stretched out her hand to help Han-Shoror up and asked worriedly. His right fist was numb all the way to his shoulder, and it was still trembling slightly. Han-Shoror panted heavily, his heart filled with shock. He was shocked by Lawton's strength. "Lawton, it looks like your strength has definitely improved. Don't think that I can't see through you just because you've held back. Perhaps you've already achieved the power of 3 berserk transformations." Trunks' eyes sparkled as he stared at Lawton's body. Han-Shoror, who was about to console Emily, was even more shocked when he heard Trunks' words. From Trunks' words, Hanshaw knew that the violent punch just now hadn't been Lawton's true strength. Just based on the tyrannical strength of the punch just now, Hanshaw was sure that Lawton wasn't inferior to an Earth Knight or Swordmaster like Clark Phoebe. This wasn't even his true strength. If Lawton had exploded with his full strength, it would have been even more shocking. No wonder he was able to take the position of chief of the Cairo mercenary band and control the Order of the Valley of Sunshine. Crunching sounds rang out from Lawton's frozen body. The sweat that had been frozen into beads of ice rolled off his body and onto the ground like sparkling pearls, shattering into ice shards when they collided with the stone floor. He couldn't help but shiver as he sneezed loudly. He then put on a fur cloak and wrapped it around his sturdy body. Only then did he look at Hanshaw in astonishment. What technique is this? I can't feel any fighting aura or magic, so why does it have the same power as a combination of fighting aura and magic? I also can't feel any undulations of fighting aura or magic on your body, but your strength isn't inferior to a swordmaster who's trained in fighting aura. There's nothing to be surprised about. Hanshaw shrugged and responded with a smile. Us berserkers have a special training method that focuses on the physical body. You're not a berserker, so how can you be like this? This is very strange. Lawton shook his head in puzzlement and responded. All right, I don't think you've called us over to interrogate us about these things, right? Hanshaw calmly walked forward and sat down on a stone chair not far from Lawton. He even called Trunks and Emily over. After experiencing the exchange just now, Hanshaw understood that Lawton's strength was likely stronger than his. However, the Cairo mercenary band's current enemy was the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band that was most likely to threaten their position. Lawton definitely wouldn't harm them if he called them over, so Hanshaw was quite relaxed. Emily and Trunks also walked casually to Hanshaw's side when they saw that Hanshaw was so relaxed. They pulled over a stone chair and sat down. Harris, how's Florida's condition after returning to the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band? Lawton actually revealed a look of praise when he saw Hanshaw and the others' casualness. He turned his head to look at Harris and asked. After entering the valley this morning, Florida suddenly fainted in front of Tanai's door and was then brought back to the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. According to our observations, Florida hasn't woken up yet, so we don't know what his current condition is. Harris displayed the proper respect when facing Lawton and quickly responded to Lawton's question. Nodding, Lawton rubbed his shiny bald head, seeming to ponder something. After a while, Lawton looked at Hanshaw and said in a loud voice, "Your strength isn't bad. I'd originally hoped that you'd consider joining our Cairo mercenary band, but since you know Trunks, you probably won't be willing to join us. I'm well aware of Florida's strength. I tested you just now, and I think it's impossible for you to heavily injure him with your strength alone. Not to mention that he has some experts from the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band with him. Can you tell me what's going on? An enemy helped me. Edwin, who came in this morning, is an enemy of Florida's grandpa. Florida ran into Edwin on the way, and the two of them fought in the end. I just happened to take advantage of the situation." Hanshaw answered honestly. There was nothing to hide about this matter now that the facts were laid out in front of him. Edwin, the Calamity Church's Dark Grand Magus Edwin. That old monster has entered the valley. Lawton was startled and turned to look at Harris. It should be him. There's also a masked woman who entered the valley after a while and is currently with him. Harris nodded and responded to Lawton. This person is very difficult to deal with. Is he your enemy? Lawton rubbed his shiny bald head again, appearing a bit troubled. Lawton, I've never heard of you being afraid of anyone in all these years. Don't tell me that you're afraid of an old man. It looks like although your strength has increased, your courage has shrunk. Trunks seemed to know Lawton's habit when he saw him rub his head and couldn't help but mock him. I'm not afraid of him, I'm just afraid of the Calamity Church behind him. This is the strongest evil cult on the Profound Continent. They never follow the rules or reason when they do things, and their power is enormous. Once provoked, it'll be a battle to the death. I'm afraid that any country on the continent would be very wary of them, not to mention our Valley of Sunshine. Lawton rubbed his head and said in annoyance. The Calamity Church was the calamity and nightmare of the entire continent. They held some unreasonable and crazy obsessions and used their power to destroy all people or countries that didn't match their wishes. Even the Lancelot Empire treated the Calamity Church as if they were facing a great enemy, not to mention a large mercenary band. Just from this point, it could be seen that the Calamity Church was indeed very frightening. Edwin is my enemy, and also Florida's enemy. Now that he's arrived in Tarnai, I think he'll definitely make a move. Han Shoror didn't have any expression on his face as he spoke indifferently. I've heard that Miss Phoebe of Boot is helping you purchase a shop. That shop is in a forbidden area in Tarnai. It's said that it's been cursed by an evil god. Anyone who takes over that shop will have their blood sucked dry and die. Do you really want that shop? Lawton didn't speak about Edwin and instead brought up this matter with interest. That's right, I've never believed in the curse of an evil god. I hope Chief Lawton can sell that shop to me. Han Shoror admitted frankly and said to Lawton, Brian, why would you want that shop? I've heard a bit about that place. Many people died there when the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band was in power. We even went in to investigate, but didn't find anything. It's an ominous place, don't take the risk. Trunks was quite surprised when he heard of this matter and turned back with a frown to persuade Han Shoror. Emily was also taken aback and turned to look at Han Shoror. She exclaimed, No, don't take the risk. I've also heard of that place. There are some unbelievable curses in there. You can't take that place. There are still a few empty shops in Tarnai. I just want to know, why have you set your eyes on that one? Lawton obviously didn't care about Han Shoror's death. He only cared about Han Shoror's intentions, so he asked about Han Shoror's intentions. I can't say anything about this, but I hope you can give that shop to me. I'll pay you a reasonable price. Han Shoror understood from Lawton's words that Phoebe hadn't succeeded yesterday. Lawton looked like a brawny, simple-minded man, but Han Shoror knew that this person wasn't as simple as he appeared. Otherwise, he would have already sold the cursed land to Phoebe without a care in the world. Of course, this is your private matter and I have no right to interfere. However, I'm the one in charge of Tarnai's shop, so I have the right not to sell it to you. Lawton laughed heartily with a confident expression. Taking a deep breath, Han Shoror said, All right, I won't force you since you don't want to sell it. If there's nothing else, I think we can leave now. It looks like there's nothing worth staying in the Valley of Sunshine. We should leave. Perhaps you really do have to leave, but Trunks should stay. Heh, isn't that right, Trunks? Lawton said with a calm expression as he gazed at Trunks. Trunks snorted coldly and glared angrily at Lawton. It was obvious that Lawton had hit the nail on the head. Han Shoror was determined to obtain the place of extreme water in the place of extreme yin. Han Shoror had only pretended to leave because he wanted to haggle with Lawton. Who would have thought that Lawton would seem to understand something and actually latch onto Trunks' weakness? Lawton had observed Han Shoror and Trunks' expressions from the moment he'd entered and was certain that the two had a close relationship. He'd brought up the matter of the shop as a bargaining chip when he'd first punched out, causing Han Shoror to forcefully exchange blows with him. This made Lawton understand that Han Shoror really did care a great deal about the shop. I've said from the start that I want to discuss a business deal with you. I've already tested your strength just now and you do indeed have the qualifications to sit down and talk with me. Now that Florida is here, this matter will be a bit easier. This is a matter that benefits both sides. Are you interested? Lawton had an expression that said he wasn't afraid that Han Shoror wouldn't agree as he chuckled. Speak, what business deal? Han Shoror lay down lazily in his chair and flicked a glance at Lawton, speaking faintly. It's very simple. You guys continue with your business, which is to kill Florida. Our Cairo mercenary band will be responsible for providing information, and we can guarantee that the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band won't mobilize a large force to deal with you. After this is done, you'll get the shop for free, Trunks will have his revenge, and we'll have one less threat. Isn't this a happy ending for everyone? Lawton's proposal was something that Han Shoror couldn't refuse. Looking at it left and right, it was a win-win situation for all three parties. However, Han Shoror didn't immediately agree. He was silent for a while and suddenly said, You guys also need to help us deal with Edwin. Otherwise, our safety won't be guaranteed with this person around. Friend, don't ask for too much. Actually, if we go find Edwin, it might be better to work with him. Lawton shook his head and declined with a darkened face. All right then, go work with Edwin. Hanshaw spread out his hands with a nonchalant expression. The Calamity Church wasn't a benevolent bunch. Anyone who worked with them had to be careful of playing with fire, especially Edwin, who was a dark Grand Magus. If Lawton worked with him, then the situation would likely be out of his control. In addition, the Calamity Church had a notorious record on the continent that angered even the gods. If the Cairo mercenary band worked with Edwin, then it would be a fatal blow to their mercenary band's reputation once this matter was revealed. At that time, all the merchants in Tanai would be infuriated, and their transcendent position in the Valley of Sunshine would be severely challenged. Hanshaw had seen this point and thus said this. We can't help you deal with Edwin. It's unwise to offend him for Florida's matter, but we can use our advantage in Tanai to provide you with information about Edwin's movements. No matter where he wants to go, we'll inform you in advance. This way, your safety will be greatly increased. This is also the limit of what we can do. Otherwise, we really can't discuss business. Lawton's face was dark as he spoke slowly. All right, then this matter is settled. Hanshaw understood that this was the greatest concession Lawton could make. The threat of the Calamity Church was too great, and the Cairo mercenary band naturally wasn't willing to become enemies with them unless it was absolutely necessary. I'm very happy to work with you. If you're willing, you can stay for lunch before leaving. Lawton seemed to be in a good mood when he saw that the matter had been settled and suggested with a hearty laugh. No, we still have matters to discuss. Hanshaw declined politely and then walked out with Emily, Trunks, and the other two. Brian, are you very familiar with Miss Phoebe of the Boot Merchant Guild? Trunks' expression was a bit odd on the way back as he suddenly stopped in a secluded area and looked at Hanshaw. Nodding, Hanshaw said, That's right, we're very close. She's my girlfriend, what about it? A strange luster appeared on Trunks' handsome face under the sunlight as he looked deeply at Hanshaw. Brian, you see, the Valley of Sunshine is a wondrous place. As long as you have the ability, you can establish your own power. If we can develop with the Valley of Sunshine as the center, we'll be able to have our own power. You have Miss Phoebe as a friend and will be able to obtain enough gold coins. I have some experienced mercenaries in my hands right now. We can completely use these resources to form our own mercenary band and establish a power that is in our own hands. As long as we have great power in our hands, we'll be able to obtain even more things and won't have to constantly be restrained by others. Actually, with Lawton's own strength, he wasn't afraid of that old monster Edwin at all. Add on Tanai and the Cairo mercenary band, it wouldn't be too difficult for Lawton to kill Edwin. He was only afraid of the Calamity Church behind Edwin. He was so wary of Florida not only because of Florida's own strength, but also because of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band in his hands. After all, one person's strength is unable to contend against a large power. As long as we work hard and combine our current advantages, along with the special place like the Valley of Sunshine, we can completely establish our own power. This way, no matter where we go in the future, our words will have different weight when we have this power in our hand. These words were filled with hot-bloodedness as they bombarded Hanshaw's mind like a bucket of wisdom. In that instant, Hanshaw suddenly understood something. A demonic heart that wasn't willing to be ordinary to begin with suddenly beat more and more violently. You're saying that the two of us should work hard and establish our own power? Hanshaw's voice sounded a bit agitated, greatly different from his usual indifference. Nodding his head heavily, Trunks continued, That's right. A group of brothers from the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band have received my message and are currently stationed in the mountain ranges around the Valley of Sunshine. However, although my brothers have extraordinary strength, they've been a bit down because they've lost the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band as their home. However, their strength and quality are undeniably good. I've hunted down all kinds of magical beast cores in the dark forest these past few years and greedily plundered some wealth. I've accumulated a bit, but it's still a bit difficult to maintain the operations of a large mercenary band. Since you have a close relationship with Miss Phoebe, I can use my current connections to form a mercenary band if I can obtain a sum of gold coins. When the mercenary band reaches a certain scale and has its own reputation, not only will we not need to invest additional gold coins, but we can also obtain large amounts of gold coins through various missions and methods to slowly strengthen our power. If our mercenary band can be like the Cairo mercenary band and maintain order in the Valley of Sunshine, we can obtain hundreds of thousands of gold coins in taxes every year by protecting the interests of merchants. With such a power in our hands, our status will be completely different in front of any person or country. Brian, Trunk's suggestion isn't bad. The organization won't care about your other identity. The stronger your other identity is, the more useful you'll be to the organization. Then, your speed of advancement will be even faster. This is mutually reinforcing. If you make it to a certain scale, perhaps the higher-ups will send people to help you and give you even more privileges. Emily was also a woman full of ambition. Her expression was joyful when she heard this, and her voice was also a bit excited as she spoke to Han Shoror. Come, let's go back and discuss this properly. Han Shoror had already made up his mind and spoke lowly with a strange smile on his face. Chapter 205. In the hotel that Han Shoror and Phoebe had booked in the Valley of Sunshine, Han Shoror, Phoebe, Emily, and Trunks sat down in the middle of Han Shoror's room with excited expressions. All of them were a bit excited. After a short conversation, Han Shoror knew that Trunks had gathered a few dozen mercenaries from the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band to deal with Florida. They hadn't entered the valley immediately, but were instead waiting in a cave outside the valley, waiting for Trunks' orders. Trunks had been a member of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band before and had a wealth of experience as a mercenary. He understood all the processes of a mercenary band's operations, and what he lacked now was the funds to register the mercenary guild and maintain the band's normal operations. Phoebe was in charge of the boot merchant guild, and the guild alone could provide many lucrative jobs. In addition, the guild was rich and imposing, and could temporarily take care of the lack of funds. Emily had a strong information network in the Dark Mantle, and with her position and identity in the Dark Mantle, she could absolutely provide Han Shoror and Trunks with a lot of valuable information. This was also very useful. Not only was Emily quite excited after the conversation, but even Phoebe was also quite interested. Han Shoror was well aware of Trunks' skills and strength. Once this mercenary band was established and started operating, business would certainly not be too bad. Trunks, calculate how many gold coins you're still lacking. Han Shoror looked at Trunks and asked. Up until now, both Han Shoror and Phoebe had expressed strong interest. As the current owner of the Boot Merchant Guild, Phoebe's problem of funds shouldn't be too hard to solve. When Trunks heard Han Shoror ask about the most important matter, he said with a bit of excitement, "The Mercenary Guild will be registered and the price will be calculated according to the number of members. Each member's salary, equipment, weapons, and war horses, as well as the mercenary band's location will all require gold coins." Currently, only 50 to 60 people had come to the Valley of Sunshine. These people were the backbone of the former Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. They'd only need to invest 20,000 gold coins to form a new mercenary band. In the future, depending on the number of members and their strength, we may need to increase the cost. However, once our mercenary group's name is known and we have our own stable partners, not only will we not need to continue investing gold coins, but we can also continue to accumulate gold coins and slowly increase our strength. Glancing at Phoebe and then at Trunks, Han Shoror smiled faintly. I've reaped great rewards from my last trip to the Dark Forest. I think that the wealth I gained from that trip is enough to establish this mercenary band. During his last trip to the underground world, Han Shoror had obtained large amounts of gems and crystals from the Dark Elves and Lizard Men. Adding on the jewels he'd obtained from the Forest Troll's sacred ground, it was even more than what he'd given to Phoebe last time. Therefore, when Han Shoror took out all the wealth he'd accumulated during this time from his space ring and placed them in the hall, whether it was Phoebe, Emily, or even Trunks, they were all dumbfounded and shocked to the core. Under the illumination of the lights, dazzling multicolored light shone from all kinds of gems and jade. The wealth piled up to the size of a small mountain. Even wealthy people like Emily and Phoebe, who were used to seeing such sights, were momentarily dazed. Oh, my gosh, Where did you get all these things from? Emily exclaimed, her beautiful face filled with shock as she stared at Han Shoror. Last time was a pile of treasures, and this time it's even bigger. The wealth here is absolutely worth 50,000 gold coins if converted into gold coins. Where did you get all of this? Emily was also astonished and exclaimed in disbelief. On the other side, Trunks shook his head with a wry smile after a brief moment of daze. He said, I stayed in the dark forest for 3 years and hunted hundreds of magical creatures, but I didn't even earn 10,000 gold coins. You're truly incredible. Help me convert these things into gold coins, and then give 30,000 gold coins to Trunks as the initial investment for establishing the mercenary band. I'll leave the rest with you. Help me purchase the materials I need. Han Shoror smiled faintly and said to Phoebe. Before Han Shoror and Phoebe had confirmed their relationship, Han Shoror had already placed a great deal of trust in her. Now that the two of them had been intimate with each other, he naturally had even less scruples. Phoebe also felt that Han Shoror's trust was a matter of course. She nodded her head in agreement and smiled lightly. Don't worry, I'll help you take care of everything. The Valley of Sunshine is the best place to do business. I'll help you convert these things into gold coins in the next 2 days. Emily was obviously a bit jealous when she saw that Han Shoror had entrusted this enormous fortune to Phoebe without reservation. However, she also knew that as the owner of the Boot Merchant Guild, Phoebe was the most suitable person to do this sort of thing, so she didn't say much. Hey, where did you get this bow from? Just as Phoebe was putting these items away into her space ring, Trunks suddenly walked over with a face full of astonishment. He picked up a bow with an odd pattern on it and asked Han Shoror. Han Shoror suddenly remembered that this bow had come from a dark elf. A dark elf had once used up all of his life force to draw an arrow with this bow, causing heavy damage to Dark Dragon Gilbert. Afterwards, when Han Shoror had obtained this bow, he hadn't discovered anything after studying it for a while. Add to that the fact that Han Shoror wasn't willing to use his life to draw an arrow, he'd thrown it into his space ring and hadn't asked about it. I obtained it from a dark elf family in the underground world. This bow is quite odd, it seems to be able to absorb a person's life force to shoot a terrifying arrow. Han Shoror explained. My gosh, this should be the bow that was cursed by Rose. Legend has it that the dark elves worshipped the evil goddess Rose and cursed this bow. It can absorb the user's life force and shoot a frighteningly powerful shot. Only perverted Avengers would use it without regard for their own life and death. Emily cried out in surprise. It looked like she'd heard of the legend of this bow. Correct, it's this bow. However, I've heard that before this bow was cursed, it was a wondrous treasure that could amplify thunder magic. If a thunder mage took this bow and used it, they would be able to shoot an astonishing amount of lightning. It's extremely powerful. Trunks grabbed the bow and said to Han Shoror, keep it, maybe someone will be able to remove the curse in the future. If the curse is removed, then this bow will definitely be a treasure that thunder mags will fight over. Emily thought for a moment and said to Han Shoror, even if this bow that could absorb life force was taken out to be sold, there probably wouldn't be many people who would dare buy it. As a demonic cultivator, as his strength increased, Han Shoror could use his magical yuan to forge magical weapons with a matrix. Perhaps there would be a way to remove the curse on it in the future. Therefore, under Emily's persuasion, Han Shoror nodded and put the bow away. He said, that's a good idea. Perhaps we can use the altar to communicate with the evil god and remove the curse. We can try it in the future. After obtaining Clarendon's memories, Han Shoror understood a few ways to communicate with the evil god. In principle, as long as you could provide the evil god with enough sacrifices, you would receive the evil god's corresponding favor. This was actually another form of business. After a while, all of the glowing jewels in the hall had been stored away by Phoebe into her space ring. Han Shoror then thought for a moment and took out another batch of dwarf-forged weapons, handing a heavy battle axe to Trunks. Han Shoror said with a smile, what do you think of the quality? Trunks' eyes had already lit up when Han Shoror had taken out these weapons, and he picked up the battle axe without a trace of politeness. The sharp surface of the battle axe was as bright as a mirror, and when Trunks shook it in his hand, the whistling sound of the wind actually came from the axe. As the battle axe swayed in his hand, There was a chilling killing intent to it. Good stuff. Where did you get it? Trunks was overjoyed as he looked at Han Shoror. These weapons were all forged by the dwarfs. Perhaps there are some things inside that will be suitable for our companions. Han Shoror smiled faintly and responded. Haha, I'm sure they'll like it. The dwarfs are famed for their skill in forging weapons on the continent. When you took out these weapons just now, I knew they weren't ordinary items. Trunks didn't stand on ceremony and readily stored all of these weapons into his space ring. He was silent for a moment afterwards and looked casually at Han Shoror, saying with a smile, Captain, everything is ready now, we're just waiting for you to pick a resounding name. Han Shoror was startled when he heard these words, and then he waved his hands with a smile, declining, I only want the position of vice captain, that's enough. You should be the real captain, you can decide the name of the mercenary band. Trunks, who had been all smiles just now, suddenly straightened his face and firmly refused, you must be the captain of the mercenary band. There's no room for discussion on this matter. If you refuse, then I'd rather refuse your good intentions and everything I've said before will be null and void. Emily and Phoebe had actually long since wanted to ask just who the master of the mercenary band was. However, it didn't seem very good to ask this out loud, so they'd held it back and decided to take some time to discuss it with Han Shoror. To the two girls, if they were to put in any effort for the mercenary band, it would only be if it was Han Shoror's. They weren't familiar with Trunks, and naturally didn't have any friendship to speak of. Although Han Shoror and Trunks seemed to have a good relationship, they obviously wouldn't agree to put their lives on the line for Trunks. The two girls showed intense interest when the thought that had been bothering them was brought up by Trunks. Two pairs of beautiful eyes constantly roamed between Han Shoror and Trunks, anxiously waiting for the two's decision. Trunks, I don't know anything about the formation and management of a mercenary band. If I were to be the captain, it would indeed be a bit inappropriate. Han Shoror really didn't know what a mercenary band needed to pay attention to, so he spoke up. No problem, you just need to give guidance on the big picture. As the vice captain, I can take care of these small matters for you. Brian, only with you as the captain will Miss Emily and Miss Phoebe spend their energy to help us. I don't have the energy to win them over. Trunks laughed self-deprecatingly and winked at Han Shoror, speaking meaningfully. Hey, if that's the case, then don't decline. Emily didn't seem embarrassed at all, as if Trunks' words were a matter of course. Phoebe also nodded with an apathetic expression and said to Han Shoror, that's right, only with you as the captain will I unconditionally help this mercenary band. All right, men should be more decisive. Hurry up and decide on the name of the mercenary band. Let me register with the Mercenary Association and officially provide a new home for my brothers. Trunks looked at Han Shoror and urged. Han Shoror was actually more aware of the current situation than anyone else. When he saw that everything that needed to be done and said had been settled, he no longer hesitated and readily agreed. All right, then let's call it the Soul Destroyer Mercenary Band. You're such a hypocrite. You've already thought of the name, and you still say you don't want to take this position. You just had to pretend to decline. You're really shameless. Trunks couldn't help but laugh when he heard Han Shoror quickly announce the name. He couldn't help but curse Han Shoror. Emily and Phoebe also looked at Han Shoror with astonishment, as if they hadn't expected that Han Shoror would think of a name so quickly. They also knew that Han Shoror indeed had the intention of taking charge of this mercenary band long ago. It seemed that his previous excuses were indeed just polite words. He's always been this shameless. Emily and Phoebe agreed with Trunks' cursing and actually opened their mouths to say the same thing. When the two girls finished speaking, they discovered that their words were exactly the same as the other person's. This made them feel extremely amused and they couldn't help but laugh out loud. All right, let's call it the Soul Destroyer Mercenary Band. I'm going to get things done now, you guys can also get busy, Trunks said. Chapter 206. Once the matter was settled, the hot-blooded youths with money and connections moved quickly. Florida's injuries were quite serious, and from the Cairo mercenary band's news, he was still in a coma. Edwin's every move was closely monitored when he arrived in the Valley of Sunshine. He'd stayed in a hotel for the past couple of days and didn't walk around. It looked like he was planning on stabilizing the injury on his back first. Trunks immediately left the Valley of Sunshine after confirming matters with Han Shoror. He said that he wanted to discuss with his mercenary brothers and settle the matters that needed to be done soon. He also wanted to tell them the good news that Florida had been seriously injured. Phoebe had received Han Shoror's large sum of wealth and appeared in Tanai Valley of Sunshine over the past couple of days. She used her connections to find a few large merchants to discuss matters of sale, and also continued to help Han Shoror purchase the materials needed to refine the wood and water elite zombies. Emily stayed in the Dark Mantle stronghold and seemed to be communicating with the higher-ups. It seemed that the senior executives of the Dark Mantle were planning on making a big move against Bob Asher this time. Trunks, who was familiar with the matter, was busy setting up the mercenary band. Han Shoror didn't have much to do after the issue of gold coins had been resolved. He used the 2 days of free time to return to the Cemetery of Death. Han Shoror wasn't actually that worried about Edwin's threat. After all, there was a dark dragon in the Cemetery of Death who could help him. Through communication, Han Shoror knew that if Dark Dragon Gilbert wanted to recover quickly, he'd need to absorb the cores of some magical creatures in order to recover quickly. It was because he understood this point and that Han Shoror needed to make use of Dark Dragon Gilbert's strength that he'd brought the injured Gilbert to hunt some high-level magical creatures in the Dark Forest over the past 2 days. 7 Windblade Wolves, 4 Frost Eagles, and 1 Medusa had been hunted down by the 2 of them in a short 2 days. With Han Shoror's current strength and Dark Dragon Gilbert's assistance, even a high-level existence like the Medusa had been killed by the combined efforts of the 2 of them. Gilbert had absorbed the energy within the magical beast cores and the Medusa's precious blood. His originally heavily injured body had mostly recovered, and his strength was no longer affected by his injuries. The cores of the magical beasts had all been absorbed by Gilbert, but the fangs, skin, and flesh were naturally taken off by Han Shoror. He had them all thrown into the warehouse of the Cemetery of Death. On the second night, Gilbert stayed in the Cemetery of Death to digest the magical beast cores, while Han Shoror went to the wide and ferocious waterfall near the Cemetery of Death by himself. The Milky Way poured down like a torrent, carrying with it a violent force that could destroy everything in its path. It was as if it had fallen directly from the 9th heaven. In the frigid winter, Han Shoror sat cross-legged on an enormous boulder near the center of the Cemetery of Death with his bare body, using his body to resist the impact of the waterfall. His naked body was dyed a bright red under the impact of the waterfall. Han Shoror sat there cross-legged, his body fused with the rocks. He was as motionless as a boulder, like a lifeless stone statue. However, within Han Shoror's body, the magical yuan was circulating rapidly like 10,000 galloping horses. All of his muscles, meridians, and bones were being tempered over and over again wherever the magical yuan passed. The demonic infant throbbed lightly in his lower abdomen. A small person that looked exactly like Han Shoror was emanating a surging life force. Han Shoror had continuously broken through in this period of time. He'd absorbed Johnny's soul last time, and it was only now that he'd completely digested it. Some messy information chaotically swayed in Han Shoror's mind. All sorts of messy memories were like clouds of smoke, making it hard for one to see clearly. Han Shoror understood that these messy information were all memories that Chu Kanglan had left in his mind. All this time, because Han Shoror's magical yuan hadn't reached the true demon realm, his brain hadn't been fully developed. Therefore, he could only receive bits and pieces of information every time. Most of his memories were still sealed in his mind. Now that he'd reached the true demon realm and his brain had been fully expanded by magical yuan, Han Shoror's memory, comprehension, and thinking abilities had all been greatly improved. When Han Shoror tried his best to explain himself, the originally blurry and messy memories were quickly torn apart and gradually became clear. Strange magical yuan techniques, sections of mysterious cultivation incantations, refining methods for all kinds of magical weapons, magical generals, and magical formations were all being rapidly processed in Han Shoror's mind. They were all imprinted in Han Shoror's mind, forever becoming an indelible memory in Han Shoror's mind. After an unknown period of time, Han Shoror suddenly woke up. Under the impact of the dripping waterfall, his eyes couldn't hide the excitement, pride, and confidence in himself. It was as if he'd been reborn, and his entire being was filled with an unprecedented confidence. Body consolidation, channel opening, mold spirit, true demon, bloodthirsty, separate demon, carnal, 9 changes, and omen realm. These 9 layers of magical yuan would allow a mortal to become an omnipotent, godlike existence. That kind of terrifying power that could split the heavens and the earth apart, when the physical body was strong enough to move mountains and seas, and become an extraordinary existence that was immortal, presented a vast, mysterious, and grand blueprint in front of Han Shoror. Now that this blueprint had been unlocked, Han Shoror was like a paintbrush that could draw out his vast and limitless future according to the path in his heart. The power to reconstruct the physical body, fly in the sky, become immortal, surpass the cycle of reincarnation, and destroy the heavens and the earth really did exist. With a thought, the pores of all the muscles in his body expelled waves of murky grey air from his body. The murky air was the impurities of Johnny's soul. After Han Shoror's demon infant had absorbed the origin of the soul, it remained in his body. With a slight sway of his body, Han Shoror's boulder-like body suddenly flew through the air and landed steadily on a large tree. He put on a dark green warrior's robe and flew straight towards the cemetery of death. "Hey, Master, you seem to be a bit different than usual." Gilbert looked at Han Shoror in surprise as soon as he entered the cemetery of death and couldn't help but exclaim, "Oh, what's different?" Han Shoror looked at Gilbert and smiled faintly. Shaking his head, Gilbert said, "I can't describe it. His eyes seem to be a bit more mysterious, and his aura is a bit different. He seems to have become more confident, as if he has the confidence of victory in his grasp after grasping the situation." Han Shoror understood that after obtaining all of Chu Kangming's memories, he now knew many of the demonic arts like the back of his hand. Even if he didn't rely on Gilbert now, Han Shoror still had a way to deal with Edwin. It was just that it would be a bit more troublesome because he wasn't strong enough. "Since your injuries have healed, let's leave this place together." "That's great. Are you going to take me to do some sneaky things again this time? Don't waste my breath, do what I tell you to do." "Master, after you left today, I seem to have seen the soil in that area loosen for a bit." Gilbert first complained in an aggrieved manner and then suddenly remembered something. He pointed at the place of extreme earth where the Earth Elite zombie had been refined and said to Han Shoror. Han Shoror started and turned his head to look at that area. He suddenly discovered that the center had indeed sunk in. The Earth Yuan Qi that had been lingering there had completely disappeared without a trace. Overjoyed, Han Shoror laughed heartily and said, "Very good, it looks like he's already absorbed all of the Earth Qi. He'll be able to break out of the ground in a few more days." "Humph, it's just a zombie, what's so great about it?" Gilbert cast a disdainful glance at the area and said unhappily. However, as soon as Gilbert finished speaking, the place where he was standing suddenly collapsed. After a wave of earth quaking and mountain shaking, an enormous gully appeared out of thin air and forcibly clamped down on Gilbert, who was caught off guard. The ruptured gully seemed to be alive as it continued to clamp down. Gilbert's body was flattened and he cursed loudly. All right, let him go." Han Shoror could feel the Earth Elite zombies' discontent buried deep in the ground and knew that it must have been the Earth Elite zombies' doing. He opened his mouth to command. As Han Shoror's voice sounded, the gully that had been continuously shrinking suddenly parted like a door. Unable to move, Gilbert discovered that all of this earthquake and the collapse of the ground was caused by the Earth Elite zombie below. He couldn't help but have a face of shock and hastily crawled out when the gully loosened. He took form here, cultivated here, and absorbed the Earth origin energy. This place is his territory. As long as he is here, he can display several times his original strength. The earth will shake, the ground will shatter, or he can form a cage from the earth to trap you. He can even form an earth dragon to attack you. It's a piece of cake for him. Remember, don't go against him in his territory in the future. Buried deep underground, he's an invincible existence in this area. If he left this place, he might not be able to control everything as he pleases. But here, any piece of land can be transformed into his weapon. Han Shoror explained faintly as he looked at Gilbert crawling out of the ravine with a supercilious smile. The 5 elemental zombies could greatly increase their own strength in the 5 places of extreme cultivation. It was unwise for anyone to provoke them in their cultivation area. The Earth Elite Zombie's response to Gilbert's words immediately affected him, made Hanshaw understand that the Earth Elite Zombie was no longer a low-level zombie warrior that could only take orders. It looked like he was the same as the Little Skull and had already gained intelligence. Seeing that Gilbert had come up, the Earth Elite Zombie immediately became much more well-behaved. Hanshaw opened his mouth and said in the direction of the Earth Elite Zombie, "Refine the Earth Chi well and try to break out of the Earth as soon as possible." A thought was transmitted into Hanshaw's mind through the connection. The Earth Elite Zombie had obviously heard Hanshaw's words and sent over the meaning of understood. "Let's go, let's leave this place first." Glancing at Gilbert, Hanshaw walked towards the center of the Cemetery of Death. When he passed by the Yin Demon Cave, Hanshaw discovered that there were only 5 wraiths left. It looked like it wouldn't be long before the 3 Yin demons would take form. Just what's going on with that zombie? How can he have such great strength? Gilbert couldn't help but ask Hanshaw after they left the Earth Elite Zombie's location and arrived at the transportation matrix at the center of the Cemetery of Death. "You wouldn't understand even if I told you. In short, he's different from any zombie warrior you know of. His existence has already changed since he started absorbing the Earth Chi. Remember, it's best not to provoke him in this Cemetery of Death. He'll be stronger than you can imagine here." Hanshaw smiled faintly and instructed Gilbert. As he spoke, Hanshaw pushed Gilbert into the center of the transportation matrix and activated it. The two returned to the Dark Mantle's secret stronghold in the Valley of Sunshine. Hanshaw put away the 6 magic wands when they walked out of a secret room. He lifted a wooden board above his head and the two walked up to a corridor leading to the top. "Brian, you're finally back," Emily suddenly called out as soon as they emerged from the secret room. "Hi beautiful woman, we meet again." Gilbert greeted Emily with a teasing smile when he came up, causing Emily to roll her eyes. "What's wrong?" Having obtained all of Chu Kanglan's memories, Hanshaw had ample confidence in his future. Hanshaw believed that as long as he worked hard and advanced his demonic cultivation, he would definitely obtain strength that everyone would look up to. It was precisely because of this that Hanshaw didn't pay too much attention to the current difficulties and setbacks. He asked Emily casually, "Florida has woken up. The Cairo mercenary band has just sent news that Florida has called for a meeting as soon as he's awakened. They're planning on making a move against us at all costs and want us to be careful. Also, Edwin and Belinda seem to have made a trip to the Cairo mercenary band in the past 2 days. We received this information ourselves and the Cairo mercenary band didn't tell us." Emily responded quickly. Nodding to indicate that he understood, Hanshaw frowned slightly and thought for a moment, saying with a smile, "We'll deal with the situation as it comes. If Florida dares come to his death, I'll make sure he'll have to bear the consequences. Don't worry about Edwin for now. I think that no matter how stupid Lawton is, he wouldn't make things difficult for us at this time. We're also the bargaining chips he's using right now. If he wants to deal with us, he'll definitely choose to do so after Florida's death. According to my estimations, Edwin may be able to obtain some information from the Cairo mercenary band, but Lawton will definitely not agree to work with him against us, nor will he choose to work with Edwin. Don't pay too much attention to this matter. What we need to do now is to defend our current stronghold." Emily was stunned for a moment by Hanshaw's words. Emily then looked oddly at Hanshaw, only then discovering that Hanshaw had maintained an aloof expression from beginning to end, as if he didn't care about any danger at all. His eyes were even more profound and mysterious, and his entire presence had changed. It was filled with an indescribable feeling, which surprised Emily a bit. "What is it? Why are you looking at me so strangely?" Hanshaw rubbed his nose and laughed involuntarily when he saw Emily's beautiful eyes staring at him without blinking. "Brian, has something happened to you in the past 2 days? Why do I feel like you're different from before?" Emily didn't hide her thoughts and asked directly. "Yes, Master is indeed a bit different from before. I've noticed it too." Gilbert couldn't help but raise a fuss at this time as his gaze continuously roamed over Hanshaw's body, seeming to want to find what was different about him. Heh, nothing much. I've just obtained a large amount of memories in the past 2 days. These memories have helped me understand many things. Han Shoror had a mysterious smile on his face as he explained to Emily. Even now, Emily still felt that Han Shoror was incredibly mysterious. Some of the things that had happened to him seemed so miraculous and out of the ordinary. The little skull that didn't fear dark magic, the miraculous weapon that could soar above the 9 heavens without relying on magic or fighting aura. All of this was beyond her comprehension. Forget it, I won't understand even if you explain. I only need to know that there's nothing wrong with you. Emily shook her head and gave up on pursuing the matter. She suddenly remembered what Han Shoror had said at the end and asked, "Oh right, you said that you want to defend our current stronghold. How do you plan on doing so?" With a mysterious smile on his face, Han Shoror mused for a moment and spat out 2 words that were completely foreign to Emily: set up the matrix. Chapter 207. Using some special materials and following the mysterious rules of heaven and earth to set up a formation that could seize the fortune of heaven and earth was a secret technique that all demonic cultivators should grasp. After digesting all of Chu Kanglan's memories, Han Shoror was no longer a passive person who would wait helplessly for death. Even if his current cultivation wasn't high enough, Han Shoror could still take the initiative by using some demonic formations. Using the method of acting first and reporting later, Han Shoror directly took over the shop with the place of extreme water. When Harris came over, Han Shoror used Florida as an excuse to beat around the bush. The glorious Tanai Cairo mercenary band was in charge of everything. As long as it was in the glorious Tanai Cairo mercenary band, they weren't afraid of Han Shoror playing any tricks. According to the agreement, as long as Han Shoror and the others killed Florida, the shop would belong to Han Shoror for free. Right now, Han Shoror was just taking it one step ahead of time. The shop wasn't like other things. If it was an ordinary item that could be carried around, Harris probably wouldn't be willing to hand it over to Han Shoror so early, because he was afraid that Han Shoror would take it away. However, the shop couldn't be moved, and Harris wasn't afraid that Han Shoror would be able to move it away. Moreover, the deed was still in their hands, so Harris didn't say anything after Han Shoror explained, tacitly agreeing to Han Shoror's actions. This shop that was rumored to be cursed by an evil god was even larger than Han Shoror had imagined. It covered an area of more than 400 square meters, and had a 70 to 80 square meters courtyard. There were also 8 or 9 rooms of various sizes, including furniture such as tables, chairs, beds, lamps, and so on. It was precisely because this was an ominous place that after the owner died, everything in the shop became ominous. No one would take the things in the shop out and cause trouble for themselves. Other than a few blankets and daily necessities, and a few rooms that were covered in dust because no one had lived here for a long time, the entire shop was not lacking anything. Before they discussed about forming a mercenary group, Han Shoror had already explained the strangeness of this shop. Although Emily, Phoebe, and the others didn't fully understand Han Shoror's explanation, they understood that Han Shoror had already cleaned up the harmful things in the shop. Out of their unconditional trust in Han Shoror, although the 2 women were still a little uncomfortable with this place, they did not clamor to stop Han Shoror from staying. Since they had decided to set up the formation, they naturally had to make preparations beforehand. Emily and Phoebe came forward and provided a list to Han Shoror. The 2 girls were responsible for collecting some necessary cold items as the most basic materials. Because he was worried about the 2 girls' safety, Han Shoror had Dark Dragon Gilbert follow them. With such an extraordinary dark dragon, an archmage, and a swordmaster, the 2 girls wouldn't be at a disadvantage even if they ran into Edwin. After everyone had been sent away, Han Shoror chanted a necromancy spell and summoned a dozen skeletal warriors. After giving an order, the skeletal warriors picked up brooms and basins and began to clean the rooms one by one. The Shora Soul formation was a demonic formation that would cause one to lose one's nature and sink into an illusion. This formation required the aura of death from 100 ghosts, condensed from cold corpses into 6 Shora pillars, and then used the blood of virgins as the brush and ink to inscribe demonic runes on the 6 pillars. In addition, a floating cloud stone would absorb 5 drops of the caster's blood essence as the eye of the formation. Once the formation was complete, any enemy who didn't understand the formation would immediately be assaulted by the aura of death from 100 ghosts if they walked in. Their entire mind would be thrown into disarray and hallucinate. They would discover their other self within the formation, wanting to kill them at all costs. Fear would cause them to instantly descend into a frenzy. No matter how resolute their mind was, it would be very difficult for them to overcome their true nature. The well in the center of the place of extreme water had been slightly modified by Han Shuro and put to good use. With the well as the eye of the formation, he formed a small-scale water ghost possession formation with some of the materials he'd recently collected for refining water elite zombies. A jellyfish was planted in every vengeful spirit, and they would be catalyzed into water ghosts in the well using a secret technique. Anyone who approached the well would be possessed by the water ghost and be dragged into the well. When he was setting up these 2 formations, Han Shuro suddenly sighed with emotion that he indeed had foresight. Once Chu Kanglin's demonic arts and the necromancy of this world were used together, it would indeed have miraculous effects beyond imagination. The ghosts needed for the Shura soul formation could be replaced by vengeful spirits, and the cold corpses could be replaced by the bodies of ordinary skeletal warriors. The water ghosts for the water ghost possession formation also needed to be catalyzed by vengeful spirits. If Han Shuro hadn't practiced necromancy, he would have had to go to some tombs and slowly gather these materials himself. However, with his identity as a necromancer, Han Shuro only needed to recite a few incantations to gather all the materials, saving him a lot of effort. After a busy day, Emily, Phoebe, and Gilbert returned to the shop in the evening. They couldn't help but be surprised by the shop in front of them. 6 white bone pillars were inserted into the 6 corners of the courtyard. A cold and gloomy aura was emitted from the courtyard. In the void, groups of grey resentful spirits were flying around, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. An evil and gloomy feeling filled the air. In the middle of the well, a few white shadows floated erratically in the air, twisting into sinister and frightening faces. A blood-red stone sat in a groove next to the well. A few vengeful spirits floated in the air around the stone, and their bodies were also dyed blood-red. Han Shuro sat cross-legged in front of the stone, shooting out rays of black light from his palms. His palms became a blurry, pitch-black color, and a dense light surrounded his body, making him look incomparably sinister. The doors to the rooms around the courtyard were all opened. The originally dusty rooms were now spotless, and all the rooms had been cleaned. The lights were bright, and it was filled with warmth and harmony. The sinister aura that lingered in the courtyard didn't seep into any of the rooms. "Oh my gosh, what are you doing?" Emily exclaimed. Her slender body turned on the spot, and her eyes were filled with curiosity. She was about to extend her hand to touch the azure stone pillar formed by the white bones. "Don't move." Han Shuro suddenly opened his eyes and shouted at Emily. Emily, who was about to touch the azure stone pillar, retracted her jade-like hand when she heard this, as though she was startled. Phoebe and Gilbert were still a little slow. They hadn't expected that in less than a day, this place would actually undergo earth-shattering changes in Han Shuro's hands. The courtyard was filled with a sinister and strange aura, causing them to feel instinctively uncomfortable. They had never seen some of the strange things and decorations, and they didn't know what they were used for. Their minds were filled with questions. With a faint smile, Han Shuro stood up from his cross-legged position and dripped a bewitching drop of blood from his right hand onto the stone in front of him. The courtyard, which was already filled with sinister gusts of wind, became even more sinister after this drop of blood was dripped into it. Vengeful spirits howled and danced in the air. A sinister and cold aura of death was incomparably dense, causing one's heart to tremble. "Did you get what I asked you to buy?" Han Shuro asked with a faint smile. "You should ask him. The most important things were all collected by him." Phoebe's face was flushed red as she pointed at Gilbert. "Evil master, why would you think of collecting the yin blood of virgins? You're too shameless and filthy." Gilbert cried out and looked at Han Shuro with a face full of disdain, appearing quite excited. "Cut the crap. Did you get what you wanted?" Han Shoror glared angrily at Gilbert. Heh, I got it. There's nothing that can't be done with gold coins. I only spent 50 gold coins to walk around a few alleys in the Valley of Sunshine and got what you wanted from the owner, Gilbert said as he took out a palm-sized bottle and handed it to Han Shoror. Emily and Phoebe both snorted coldly when they saw him take out the bottle of virgin yin blood, turning their heads and walking towards the rooms in the courtyard. Chimph, what did I do? I didn't do it willingly, it was all Master's orders. Do you think I did it willingly? Those stinky women in the alleys all looked at me as if I was a pervert with a special hobby. If I hadn't taken out the gold coins, I'm afraid I would have drowned in their spittle. Gilbert was quite aggrieved when he saw Emily and Phoebe look at him with extreme disdain and couldn't help but complain. Some rich customers in the Valley of Sunshine liked virgins to serve them. Therefore, in order to attract more customers, the owners would spend large sums of money to buy some virgin slaves. Han Shoror knew this and thus had asked Gilbert to do this. Although Han Shoror's skin was thick enough, it was still a bit embarrassing for him to buy something like this from others. After all, in the eyes of those who didn't know the truth, this kind of behavior was quite perverted. All right, go do what you need to do, don't bother me. Han Shoror was very understanding of Gilbert's grievances, but didn't console him. Before they returned, Han Shoror had already used the Demon Slayer edge to carve a complicated pattern on the 6 Azura pillars formed from the cold corpses. He drew a bucket of spirit water from a place of extreme water and diluted the bottle of virgin yin blood into it. Using a peachwood spoon to stir the water, Han Shoror grabbed the bucket and flew out. He leapt onto the first Azura pillar and started pouring the liquid from the top of the pillar. Seeing that Han Shoror had started to work, Emily and Phoebe, who had just entered the warm room, walked out again. 2 pairs of bright eyes watched Han Shoror's movements with curiosity. The reddish-brown liquid flowed down the pattern that Han Shoror had carved earlier. Miraculously, not a single drop of the liquid rolled down. It was as if it was tightly attracted by a force, all of it imprinted into the grooves carved into the stone pillars. One by one, when Han Shoror had completed the 6 pillars, Han Shoror casually threw the empty bucket to the side and flew to the blood-red stone beside the well. He formed a hand sign to control the demonic formation and a black light flew out from Han Shoror's palm, landing in the center of the blood-red stone. Suddenly, the 6 stone pillars shone with a reddish-brown light. The patterns engraved on the Azura pillars were densely packed with all kinds of ferocious ghost faces. The hundreds of wraiths that had been flying around the courtyard were like baby swallows' ghost nests as they flew into the sinister ghost faces engraved on the stone pillars with a whooshing sound. The wraiths that were originally in a state of nothingness seemed to merge with the sinister ghost faces as soon as they fell into the Azura pillars. Each and every one of them seemed to have a body and began to twist and turn on the stone pillars, revealing a bloody mouth full of fangs. Shrill cries of despair instantly resounded through the night sky, causing one's hair to stand on end and their hearts to tremble. Not good. Han Shoror was shocked. He hadn't thought that after the formation was formed, there would be such terrifying cries of ghosts and howls of wolves. He immediately formed another hand sign, which fell into the floating cloud stone that had absorbed 5 drops of his blood essence. In an instant, the wraiths that had a body were abruptly sucked into the Azura pillars. The stone pillars with hundreds of dancing ghosts suddenly returned to normal. The wraiths within the stone pillars seemed to have been frozen in the sinister ghost faces, without the slightest sign of life. Give me all the remaining materials. The formation will be formed soon. Even if that old monster Edwin comes, I will make him suffer. Han Shoror laughed maniacally as he spoke to Phoebe and Emily. The 2 girls were horrified. When they heard Han Shoror's words, their minds were in a mess as they handed over the cold and evil items that Han Shoror had ordered them to purchase to Han Shoror one by one. After he'd obtained all the materials, Han Shoror's body flitted through the center of the yard under the trio's incredibly puzzled gazes. It was at this moment that the trio discovered that there were many large and small grooves in the ground of the yard. These grooves had been cut flat and were just enough for Han Shoror to place all the items in. When everything was done, Han Shoror retreated from the courtyard. When Han Shoror stood beside Phoebe and Emily, he called Gilbert to his side. With a single thought, A beam of blood-red light shot into the sky from the courtyard. In an instant, a chilly wind blew through the courtyard, and the ghosts on the 6 stone pillars danced wildly. An extremely cold and evil feeling instantly filled the hearts of Phoebe and the others. The 3 of them understood that the originally simple courtyard had become a life-threatening danger zone after Han Shoror's torment. Turning his head to look at Emily, Han Shoror had a mysterious smile on his face as he spoke to the trio. As long as we set up a soundproof boundary around the area, then it'll be foolproof. Leave this matter to me. Emily understood and released a dark magic spell. A wave of magic suddenly appeared in the air above the courtyard, like a colorless and formless cover, covering the sky above the courtyard. What's going on? Is the evil god's curse acting up again? Harris's shout suddenly came from outside. A series of footsteps could be heard as Harris and the others from the Cairo mercenary band appeared in front of the shop on their war horses. Harris dismounted and knocked on the door as he called out. Because the floating cloudstone was the eye of the formation and had 5 drops of Han Shoror's blood essence on it, Han Shoror only needed a thought to use the floating cloudstone to control the entire formation within this area. When he heard Harris' shouts, Han Shoror made some slight adjustments to the formation. All of the abnormalities within the courtyard returned to their original state. Apart from the 6 Azura pillars, there were no other changes. Nothing much, Mr. Harris. Is there some news that you want to tell us? Han Shoror opened the door to the shop and allowed Harris to enter. He answered calmly with a face full of smiles. After Harris entered, his sharp eyes looked around, scanning every corner of the shop. Only then did he ask Han Shoror with some confusion, "Why are there 6 strange stone pillars all of a sudden?" "Oh, we're planning on staying here for a long time. Because we're lacking something to dry our clothes on, we got 6 pillars as support." "How did Mr. Harris find the time to come over?" There was a bright red light just now, and some of the people in the surrounding shops heard a terrifying howl from within. They said that it was frightening and told us to come over to take a look. "I was worried that something would happen to you, so I came over to take a look." Laughing lightly, Han Shoror said jokingly, "Those people are always so ignorant. We were just practicing magic just now. With the few of us here, even if the curse came true, we wouldn't be afraid. Don't worry." "Hey, is this pervert who collects the yin blood of virgins also your friend?" Harris nodded and didn't say much. He was about to leave when he suddenly discovered Gilbert and couldn't help but ask Han Shoror. "Hey, I guess so." Han Shoror was a bit embarrassed and turned to glare at Gilbert, who was about to explode, to indicate for him to shut up. He then explained to Harris. "Why do you have a friend like this? He's so disgusting." Harris looked at Gilbert with extreme disdain and didn't want to stay here any longer. He hurriedly left with the others as if he was trying to hide. "Goddamn, it's all Master's orders, what does it have to do with me?" After Harris left, Gilbert finally couldn't take it anymore and roared angrily, seething with anger. Chapter 208. After Han Shoror's torment, the shop had truly become a place of great danger. Without Han Shoror's guidance, anyone who tried to enter would be attacked by the demonic formation. Those with insufficient willpower would lose their minds and seek their own deaths. After the shop had been completely remodeled, Phoebe, Emily, and Gilbert all took up residence. The 3 of them were on tenterhooks the entire night when they saw the strangeness of the yard, deathly afraid that something would happen to them while they slept soundly. The night passed peacefully, and Trunks returned at noon the next day after having been gone for a few days. As soon as Trunks entered the Valley of Sunshine, he learned from Harris of the Cairo mercenary band that Han Shoror's group had moved to the cursed shop. When Trunks arrived, he found that there were suddenly 6 white stone pillars in the yard. He was quite flabbergasted and didn't know what was going on. "When I came over, I heard from Harris that something strange happened here last night. Did you guys run into something?" Trunks asked when he sat down in the living room of the shop. Smiling faintly, Han Shoror explained, "We did indeed run into something, but it wasn't some evil god's curse. I created it myself. You don't need to worry about anything, there are quite a few rooms here. I've already reserved one for you. Forget it, it's safer for me to change places. I've seen many owners of this shop die mysteriously in Tanai of Sunshine a few years ago. Although you said that the danger has been resolved, I'm still a bit worried. Trunks was obviously traumatized and immediately waved his hands with a wry smile. Who is this kid? He dares not believe in Master. Dark Dragon Gilbert was in a bad mood after being called a perverted pervert. He couldn't help but yell when he heard Trunks waffle and refused to stay. And who are you? Trunks started and suddenly looked at Gilbert. The manticore that Trunks had been riding had already displayed abnormalities when he'd entered. The originally fearless manticore was instinctively on guard against Gilbert. It tried not to get too close to Gilbert. As a magical beast with intelligence, the manticore could naturally sense the powerful presence of the super-rank Dark Dragon. Even though Gilbert had transformed into his human form, the manticore still did not dare to approach Gilbert. This was a fear brought about by the difference in rank. As the manticore's master, Gilbert had been with the manticore for a few years and was very familiar with its temperament. Seeing that the manticore was behaving so strangely, Gilbert, who had noticed it from the start, couldn't help but ask. I am the mighty Black Dragon clan, the future most outstanding king, Gilbert. Gilbert had an arrogant look on his face as he shouted in a booming voice. Just like your manticore, he's my magical pet, a lecherous little dark dragon. Hanshoro flicked a glance at Gilbert and explained to Trunks. Trunks was very shocked when he heard that Gilbert was a dark dragon. He then couldn't help but sigh, you're really something. I thought taming a manticore was already something to be proud of, but you actually have a dark dragon. It looks like you're a bit stronger than me. It's not my fault, I just happened to pick up a bargain. It was this dark dragon who shamelessly pestered me. Hanshoro shrugged and said modestly. He then paused and changed his tone, asking Trunks, right, you didn't run into any danger when you left the valley this time, did you? How did things go? Trunks' face grew serious when he saw that Hanshoro was talking about serious matters. He said lowly, don't worry, I'm more familiar with the geography of the Valley of Sunshine than Lawton and Florida. It won't be easy for anyone to harm me in the Valley of Sunshine. I've met with some of my old friends and they've expressed great interest in forming a mercenary band. I've already arranged for people to apply for the title of Soul Destroyer. We'll be able to officially have our own title before long. Nodding, Hanshoro said, that's good. This will be our base of operations now. With Florida's power, he'll surely be able to find our current location. We don't need to be in a hurry, we just need to wait for him to attack us. With the existence of the magical formation, Hanshoro wanted to test it out on Florida's men. He wanted to see if the magical formation was as wondrous as Chu Kanglin's memories had described. Unexpectedly, neither Florida's men nor Edwin came looking for trouble after another 2 days. Hanshoro's group stayed here for the past 2 days, only wandering around the busy merchant streets for a bit during the day. All the materials needed to refine the wood elite zombie had finally been gathered. Phoebe used these days to discuss a few deals with a few merchants, exchanging 2/3 of the jewels and crystals that Hanshoro had given her for 40,000 gold coins. These 40,000 gold coins were handed over to Trunks with great trust by Hanshoro, allowing him to use them reasonably to form the Soul Destroyer mercenary band. Hanshoro silently practiced his magical arts in his room, not taking a single step out of the shop in the past 2 days. After a low incantation, the courtyard that was illuminated by the sun was suddenly covered by dark green clouds, plunging the entire courtyard into darkness. The sinister greenish-black clouds engulfed the entire radiance of the sun. A strong deathly aura spread rapidly, filling the courtyard in an instant. The vengeful spirits sealed in the stone pillars sensed this wonderful aura and seemed to be eager to make a move. The canopy of necromancy spell could cause the aura of death to spread out. Dark creatures within the range of the canopy of necromancy would greatly increase their attack power. Once an enemy fell within the range of the canopy of necromancy, their fighting strength would be weakened by the spell. Not only had Hanshoro grasped all of the spells that adept mags should be able to grasp now, but he could also skillfully use them. If he returned to the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force with his current strength, Hanshoro was confident that he could easily advance to Adept Mage. According to his agreement with Fanny, as long as Hanshoro advanced to Adept Mage, he would have the right to interact with her. Whenever he thought of Fanny's feelings for him, Han Shor felt extremely motivated. Although he now possessed the hearts of two beauties, Emily and Phoebe, his feelings for Fanny were irreplaceable by the two women. Han Shor had never slacked off on his magical arts training. However, at this stage, the demon infant needed some soul energy to replenish and strengthen. Just relying on hard training wouldn't allow him to make great progress in a short period of time. Therefore, Han Shor was waiting for an opportunity to find the souls of some experts to replenish the nutrients that his demon infant needed. One evening, as Han Shor was cultivating his magical arts with his eyes closed, he suddenly felt the call of the little skull. An anxious emotion suddenly came from a distant plane. The little skull's call was urgent, and carried a kind of panic as if he was struggling to avoid danger. With his previous experience, Han Shor immediately knew that the little skull must have run into danger again. Without thinking too much, Han Shor immediately chanted an incantation through the connection between the two of them, attempting to summon the little skull from the distant plane to him. After the incantation was completed, the space in front of him suddenly seemed to have been sliced open by a sharp knife. The little skull's 7 bone spurs flickered as it shot out from the torn space like lightning. However, behind the little skull, the torn space suddenly reflected the figure of a giant knight that was 5 to 6 meters tall, riding a strange fire horse, and wielding a broadsword that was 2 meters long. A huge rotten aura came from this giant shadow. The overwhelming aura of death was so strong that it made people's hearts tremble. This dark creature from another world was restricted by the laws of space, and it could only reveal a huge shadow. Then, when the little skull landed in front of Han Shor, the torn space suddenly returned to normal, and the huge aura disappeared without a trace. The astonished little skull held his bone knife in his left hand and the eye patch in his right hand. After losing the eye patch in his left eye, the purple demon eye that the little skull obtained from the Dadara demon statue blinked and shone with a purple light as he stared blankly at Han Shor. Suddenly, a huge force burst out from the purple demon eye in the left eye of the little skull. This force instantly burst out, and with the purple demon eye as the center, it tried to invade the bodies of the little skull and Han Shor, intending to take control of the bodies of the little skull and Han Shor. Just like the situation in the Holy Land of Forest Troll, this force came from the purple demon eye. It was filled with a violent desire to plunder everything, and it would suddenly attack after the eye patch was taken off, as if the demon Dadara demon had really left a part of her divine sense in the purple demon eye. Put on the eye patch, hurry up. Han Shor's entire body trembled from the pain, as if several sharp knives were violently stirring in his mind. He suddenly yelled out, his body trembling with pain. The little skull was also suffering. He fell to the ground and kept rolling. After receiving the order from Han Shor, he finally put on the eye patch with trembling hands. Miraculously, the force that invaded the bodies of the two disappeared without a trace as the eye patch was put on. However, just as Han Shor heaved a sigh of relief and turned to look at the little skeleton, he saw purple light shoot out of the little skeleton's left eye. The eye patch that he'd been using to cover his purple demon eye seemed to be incinerated by a raging fire, turning into sparks and disappearing in the wind. Chapter 209. After the eye patch that sealed the purple demon eye was incinerated into ashes, the purple demon eye embedded in the little skull's left eye socket once again emitted a blinding purple light. In an instant, the heart-wrenching pain once again invaded Han Shor and the little skull's bodies. The unforgettable pain caused both Han Shor and the little skull to tremble uncontrollably. In the room, Han Shor couldn't help but let out a low growl. The little skull's white mouth was also smacking its lips. The man and the skeleton were simultaneously invaded by an inexplicable power. Suddenly, the demon infant that was originally hibernating in Han Shor's lower abdomen produced a huge suction force, much to Han Shor's surprise. In an instant, Han Shor had the illusion that the demon infant had become a boundless black hole. With the demon infant as the center, Han Shor's body seemed to have become a huge spiderweb, and all of his meridians had become tenacious lines that resembled spider webs. The power that invaded Han Shoror's body was attracted by the demon infant and automatically gathered at Han Shoror's demon infant through the spider web-like meridians like a trickle returning to the sea. Following this sudden change in his body, the unforgettable pain suddenly weakened by a lot. The power that invaded Han Shoror's body was sent to the demon infant through his meridians. Just like how Johnny's soul energy was digested and absorbed, it furiously nourished the demon infant's growth. After the pain in his body gradually came under control, Han Shoror saw that the little skull was still rolling on the ground. With a thought, Han Shoror suddenly struggled to come to the little skull's side. He opened his left hand and aimed his palm at the left eye socket of the little skull where the purple demon eye was stored. He took the initiative to release the demonic art of assimilation. His left hand suddenly shone with a dense demonic light. Rays of faint purple light flowed from Han Shoror's arm into Han Shoror's body. Just like the power in Han Shoror's body, it was sent to the demon infant through his meridians. At this time, Han Shoror was sure that the power from the purple demon eye was also soul energy. It seemed to have a close relationship with the protector of the forest troll, the demon Dadara. Perhaps it really was a wisp of soul energy left behind by the demon Dadara in this plane. Compared to Johnny's soul energy, the soul energy that came from the purple demon eye was much larger and purer. It was filled with a violent and plundering aura and wasn't rejected by the demon infant at all. Once it fell into the demon infant would frantically circulate it and slowly convert and purify the enormous power. Looking inside the demon infant, Han Shoror could see that the demon infant was like a sun burning with black demonic fire, bursting with blazing demonic light. Han Shoror's body also shone brightly at this time. Waves of violent, chaotic, evil demonic energy curled around Han Shoror's body. From afar, it looked like Han Shoror suddenly had countless black arms dancing around his body. After an unknown amount of time, Han Shoror suddenly let go. There was a crisp crack, and the purple demon eye in the little skull's left eye socket seemed to have shattered. The purple demon eye suddenly became dim, and a cloud of dense purple smoke overflowed from his left eye socket. The demon infant was still circulating frantically. The soul energy that it had just obtained from the purple demon eye was much stronger than what it had obtained from Johnny a few days ago. When Han Shoror sensed that all the power had been absorbed by the demon infant, he gave an order to the little skull to protect himself. He sat cross-legged and entered a state of bitter cultivation and digestion. The power of the purple demon eye was completely absorbed by Han Shoror's demon infant. The little skull, who was in excruciating pain like Han Shoror, sat on the ground in a daze for a long time. After the strange power of the purple demon eye disappeared, it was embedded in the little skull's left eye socket. As it rolled around, it gave the little skull a more lively look. What's going on? When Emily and Gilbert sensed the black demonic aura bursting out from Han Shoror's room, they couldn't help but come to investigate. When the little skull, who was sitting on the ground, heard the noise outside, it straightened its legs and stood up. The purple demon eye blinked a few times, and it walked to the door to open it. When Emily and Gilbert saw the door open, and a short, pure white little skull suddenly appeared in front of them. The little skull had a purple eyeball in its left eye socket, and it was rolling around. They were shocked and couldn't help but take a few steps back. It pointed at Han Shoror with its left hand. The little skull's left eye rolled around, and it looked at Emily and Gilbert. It put its hand on its mouth and made a shushing gesture, which meant, he needs silence. Don't disturb him. Emily and Gilbert stared at the little skull that was asking them to keep quiet. For a moment, they felt that the scene in front of them was too challenging. A dark creature making such a humanoid gesture in front of them, especially with its left eye socket and its eyeball moving around. All of this was so unimaginable. It was a good thing that this wasn't Emily's first day knowing Han Shoror. When she had first fought with Han Shoror, she had already suffered at the hands of this little skull. Therefore, when she carefully looked at the little skull and discovered the 7 bone spurs on its back, she immediately understood that although the color of the bones had changed, this little skull was still the mysterious little skull that was immune to most dark magic, the one that had chased her for days and left her helpless. I think your master must have made some miraculous progress again. Let's not disturb him. Taking a deep breath, Emily shook her head at Gilbert, indicating for Gilbert to retreat with her. Last time in the Cemetery of Death, the Earth Elite zombies' sudden outburst had already made Gilbert realize that the dark creatures his master had summoned were absolutely different from the ones he knew. A zombie could form an enormous ravine in the ground and attack him because of a single sentence. Then this little skull with humanoid gestures wasn't that hard to understand. I think it'll be very interesting in the future to follow a master like this. Gilbert looked at the little skeleton with great curiosity and waved goodbye. He closed the door and said to Emily, "It's fine, but it's fine. I think so too, but you need to continuously improve yourself. Otherwise, you might discover one day that you can't even beat a dark creature your master has summoned." Emily had heard from Han Shoror that the dark creatures he'd refined had limitless potential to evolve on their own. She hadn't quite believed it at first, but now that she'd seen the little skull's performance, she was convinced without a doubt. Han Shoror didn't feel anything when Emily and Gilbert entered. The enormous power from the purple demon eye allowed Han Shoror to focus his attention to the extreme, completely unaffected by the various disturbances of the outside world. Some demonic practitioners would need to find an extremely quiet place to train in seclusion when they needed to practice a certain secret art or demonic treasure. They would also need to set up layers of defensive measures to prevent others from disturbing them. The reason why they were so cautious was because that state was when the demonic practitioner would be least prepared. They couldn't be disturbed in the slightest when refining demonic treasures or practicing demonic arts. Otherwise, it was very likely that they would suffer chi deviation and waste all their previous efforts. Another 2 days and 2 nights passed after Han Shoror's preparations. Han Shoror didn't take a single step out of his room during these 2 days and 2 nights. Phoebe, Emily, and Trunks didn't slack off during these 2 days. They were either busy with the matters of establishing the mercenary band or continuing to discuss business to help Han Shoror sell the jewels and items. On this day, in the middle of the night, a few people were in the shop discussing how to make better use of the gold coins and manage the mercenary group's affairs. Suddenly, a mercenary from the Cairo mercenary group knocked on the door and said that a group of people were on their way. The mercenary from the Cairo mercenary group immediately left after reporting this information. He said that he needed to report this information to the leader or vice leader of the Cairo mercenary group. He told Emily and the others to be careful and that their people would arrive within half an hour. It looks like the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band has arrived. Brian can't be disturbed at the moment, and we don't know when he'll wake up either. This is a bit troublesome, Emily said with a slight frown after the mercenary left. Who cares who they are? If they dare trespass here, we'll make them suffer the consequences. Dark Dragon Gilbert obviously didn't take this matter to heart as he spoke carelessly. It won't be that easy to deal with. Florida's Rainbow Sickle mercenary band is full of experts, and the Church of Light has also sent some experts to him. You may not be able to win even if you transform into your dragon form. Trunks' brow was also deeply furrowed as he spoke lowly. Brian can't be disturbed right now. There's that dark creature protecting him inside and he shouldn't be able to leave. We must protect him if he's here. As long as we hold them off for a while and wait for the Cairo mercenary band to arrive, then there won't be any problems. Phoebe thought for a moment and responded. The hoofbeats of the war horses resounded in the silent night sky. From the volume of the sound, one could tell that the hooves of the war horses were covered by something soft like cotton cloth. Be careful, protect Brian's room first. Emily called out lightly and instructed the others. Chapter 210. The enemy had come faster than they had imagined. The clattering of iron hooves had just sounded in the distance when strange noises came from the rooftops. Come, let's leave the room and go into the yard. Trunks' expression was calm as he hefted a long sword and led the way into the yard with the manticore. There was a wide yard in the center of the shop, surrounded by several large and small houses that surrounded the yard. If the enemy came to attack, and the power of their attacks directly passed through the walls and into the houses, they would be forced into a passive position if they wanted to leave after adding fire magic to it. In addition, the yard had been meticulously decorated by Han Shoror. Han Shoror had once told them that the 6 pillars contained great danger, but if they stood in a special position next to the pillars, they would instead be unaffected by the formation. The formation hadn't been activated yet, but if the 6 pillars were fiercely attacked, the formation would automatically react even without Han Shoror's orders. We're not familiar with the things in the yard, so don't act rashly unless we have no other choice. But if we really can't withstand it, we'll attack the stone pillars and quickly hide in 6 safe places. Let's gamble. Emily walked into the yard and took out her staff as she spoke to the 3. The canopy of necromancy that Han Shoror had cast last time was no longer effective because it had been 2 days. Specks of starlight were embedded in the night sky like diamonds, adding a few scattered glimmers to the pitch-black night, allowing the people in the yard to roughly make out everything around them. Suddenly, a sharp whistle tore through the air as a small bone dagger, glittering with cold light, abruptly shuttled through the rooftops like a drifting ghost. The sharp whistle of the small bone dagger tore through the silence of the night. The dim light was extremely conspicuous and carried a cold, icy aura of death as it flew in an irregular, mysterious trajectory above the rooftops around the yard. A few soft poochy noises sounded in the dark corners where the little bone blade flew past. In those places where it was difficult to see, a hair-raising scream suddenly sounded. Then, 3 pitch-black figures fell to the ground in a sorry manner, falling from the roof to the courtyard with 3 putong noises. When Trunks and the other 2 saw this, they immediately understood what had happened. When they saw the 3 people lying on the ground not far away, they didn't even think about it and went forward to stab them a few times. The 3 of them staggered as they tried to stand up, but under the 2 slashes of Trunks and Phoebe, their knees gave way and they fell down forever. With the 3 dead, Trunks and the other 2 looked at Han Shoror's room in shock. They saw that a corner of a window in the tightly shut room had been lifted open. The purple demon eye in the left eye of the little skull was spinning and flashing with a strange purple light. It was like a ball of purple will-o'-the-wisp dancing behind the dark window. A white bone claw that was as white as jade leaned against the window, and the 5 white bones swayed continuously. The small bone dagger that was flying on the roof seemed to be controlled by the 5 bones of his hand, spinning in a random pattern. What a terrifying little skull. Trunks couldn't help but shake his head with a wry smile as he sighed. Look over there. Gilbert suddenly yelled. Following Gilbert's direction, the 3 saw 3 grey balls of air float out from the heads of the 3 people who had just died. When the 3 grey balls of air left their bodies, they seemed to be drawn by some kind of power and were sucked into 2 stone pillars at the side. If I'm not wrong, those 3 grey balls of air should be the souls of the 3 people who just died. When an ordinary person dies, their soul will return to the earth. Without the use of magic, ordinary people can't see it at all. As a dark archmage, Emily was a bit more knowledgeable in this area than the others. She frowned as she explained to the other 3. Then why can we see it, and why can the stone pillars absorb the 3 grey balls of air? Phoebe asked in confusion. Shaking her head with a wry smile, Emily turned her head to look at the room Han Shoror was in and said, "How would I know what's going on? If you want to understand all of this, wait until he wakes up and ask him yourself. This yard is full of oddities anyways, and it's all his doing. I don't think I'd understand even if he explained." She and Emily found it equally difficult to understand the mysteries surrounding Han Shoror. When Emily said this, Phoebe could only shake her head with a wry smile. As the 4 spoke, the small bone dagger continued to whirl about on the roof. The 3 fellows who'd planned on ambushing had been caught off guard before they'd even gotten a clear look at the situation, and died a horrible death in an instant. It was truly an unjust injustice. However, these 3 were only scouts who'd come to investigate. Although they'd died, the enemies behind them hadn't been affected. Trunks and the others knew that the true battle was finally about to begin when the originally silent sounds of iron hooves suddenly died down. Suddenly, the whistling of the small bone dagger became even more intense. When the 4 looked over, the small bone dagger had already left the vicinity of the roof and was slicing through the night sky even further away. In the direction where the little bone dagger flew, 2 faint shadows gradually turned from blurry to clear. In the starry night sky, the 2 shadows were like 2 drifting clouds that were blown over by a light breeze. "It's 2 archmages, we need to be careful." Emily's heart jumped as she warned gravely. A scorching flame suddenly appeared in front of the small bone dagger as soon as Emily's words had sounded. The small bone dagger sparkled even more coldly under the illumination of the flames, and the surface of the bone dagger lit up with a blinding light. Suddenly, a few crossbow bolts tore through the air from below. 5 of the crossbow bolts missed, but only one accurately hit the small bone dagger, sending it flying into the distance. With a ding-dong sound, it landed on the street not far away. The sound of the door shattering suddenly sounded at this moment as footsteps rapidly approached. A line of more than 10 people wearing armor and wielding weapons such as swords, spears, axes, and bows filled the courtyard in an instant. The 2 archmages who'd floated over also stood on the roof without the threat of the bone dagger, watching the scene with cold eyes. "Trunks, you're here as well." The fire archmage who'd saved Florida last time in front of the Valley of Sunshine stood on the roof and looked coldly at Trunks. "Andy, you traitor, you still have the face to see me. The old chief treated you well back then. The magic staff in your hand was forged by someone else at great expense. To think that you'd be with that animal Florida after the old chief died." Trunks pointed the long sword in his hand at the fire archmage Andy and rebuked coldly. "The old chief's death was an accident. He died at the hands of bandits in the surrounding mountain ranges and had nothing to do with Florida. It was all because you were jealous that Florida had become the chief of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band that you framed him." Andy looked disdainfully at Trunks and mocked him. "I think that with your intelligence, you should be able to tell what the truth is. Now that I've returned, I'll make all of you traitors pay the price." Andy first laughed loudly and then shook his head at Trunks with pity. "Today is the day you die. You won't have another chance in the future. Don't waste words with him. Lawton's men can appear at any time. We need to kill them immediately," the other mage who'd come with him said expressionlessly. There was a lightning pattern on the chest of this person's magic robe. It looked like he was a thunder archmage. He was around 30 years old and had a head of long grey hair. His body was as thin as a bamboo pole as he paced back and forth on the roof. "Got it," Andy replied impatiently. It seemed that he didn't have a good relationship with this lightning archmage. He then looked down with a slightly strange gaze and said in a strange tone, "Do it." There were more than 10 people in the courtyard, all of them made up of swordsmen, knights, and archers. The weakest among them were journeyman swordsmen and knights. There was also one person wrapped in a long green robe with a pointed hat up. His appearance couldn't be seen in the darkness, but there was a strong presence coming from his body. When Andy had spoken just now, he'd looked at this person indistinctly. His calm voice didn't sound like an order, but rather like he was seeking the opinion of an elder. The person's body suddenly moved as soon as Andy's words fell. An enormous silver sword light abruptly emanated from his body. The sharp sword light cut through the air as his body rose. The pointed hat on his head flew backwards, revealing a face that even Emily and Phoebe were familiar with. "Gabriel, it's you." Emily couldn't help but exclaim in shock. Gabriel was Clark's master and had the extraordinary strength of a great sword master. He'd always been by Griffin Legion Commander Ash's side. Who would have thought that he'd appear here? Chapter 211. The long sword in Gabriel's hand moved, and a silver sword aura tore through the air, the sharp killing intent chilling to the bone. As Emily cried out in alarm, Trunks and Gilbert had already leapt forward to block Gabriel. Trunks, who was riding on the manticore, had a cold and serious expression on his face as he raised the greatsword in his hand, forming a milky white circle of swords in front of him. Gilbert held a dark spear in his hand. Since he didn't practice any martial arts techniques, he purely used the tough body of his dragon race to viciously throw out a spear. The sound of metal clashing rang out as Trunks and the manticore dodged in panic with a muffled groan. Gilbert's spear had been broken into 2, and his chest had been cut open by the sword aura, revealing a large piece of dark skin. Great Swordmaster Gabriel's expression was cold and sinister, and he was calm and composed after that strike. He wasn't in a hurry to immediately attack, but instead cast his gaze towards the room where Hanshor and Little Skull were. The howl of the bone dagger suddenly sounded at this moment as a small, dark bone dagger suddenly shot out from the direction Gabriel was looking at. The The little skeleton's left eye, glowing with purple light, focused on Gabriel as the 5 white bone claws on its left hand waved continuously. Trunks, who was still panting, and Gilbert, who was drenched in cold sweat, were both shocked by Gabriel's terrifying strength. It was just a simple strike, but Trunks had been attacked with the force of an avalanche, and could only dodge. As for the powerful Gilbert, because he didn't know how to use martial arts techniques, his spear had been cut in 2 by the silver fighting aura. If he hadn't dodged in time, his chest would have been injured by the fighting aura. However, just as the two were having a headache over how to deal with Gabriel, Little Skull's assistants arrived just in time. A dark bone blade forced Gabriel to treat it with caution. The spell to control a demonic treasure was a secret technique unique to demonic arts practitioners. Gabriel had obviously been stunned by this miraculous attack, which was why he had given up on pursuing Gilbert and Trunks, and instead focused all his attention on dealing with Little Skull's bone dagger. The silver sword gleam was dazzling, and under the starry sky, it was like fireworks exploding in the night sky. It formed a tight defense around Gabriel. The small bone daggers revolved around Gabriel's body, emitting sharp whistles as they danced around, attempting to deal a fatal blow to Gabriel. "What are you guys standing there looking at? Attack immediately!" Andy suddenly shouted at this time. The group of armored mercenaries who'd been dumbfounded by the little bone dagger's miraculous attacks were finally roused from their stupor by this shout. They either raised their bows and took aim, or raised their swords to circle around Gabriel and charge at Trunks and the others. Andy and the Thunder Archmage on the rooftop saw the swordsmen and knights make their move and didn't remain idle either. They coordinated with these people and started attacking Emily and the others with magic. In an instant, 3 blazing fireballs the size of millstones fell from the roof towards where Emily and the others were standing with violent, raging flames. A few bolts of lightning tore through the sky, accompanied by a crackling sound, and struck that space. "Not good." Emily cried out in alarm as she released a dark magic spell that she'd already prepared. It was like a giant, oily green net that appeared above everyone's heads as Emily chanted. As soon as the giant net formed, it first stalled the 3 fireballs. However, the lightning attacks passed through the gaps in the giant net and continued smashing towards them. Emily and the others were constantly changing their positions below, dodging the void lightning all over the place. For a time, the ground in the courtyard crackled. 2 of the Azura stone pillars were also bombarded by the lightning, flashing with dazzling light. A clang sounded from Gabriel's direction. Having gotten used to the little skull bone dagger's attacks, Gabriel's sword accurately struck the bone dagger and sent the spinning bone dagger crashing to the ground. "Friend in the house, your miraculous techniques are admirable, but your sneak attack style is a bit despicable. Since you have such a miraculous technique, you should walk out of the house openly and fight me for real." Great Swordmaster Gabriel naturally thought that this miraculous technique of controlling the bone dagger had come from Han Shoror, who had been cultivating in the house in silence. Although he'd seen the little skull's slightly strange gesture of flipping his 5 white fingers, he wasn't willing to believe that such a strange attack had come from a low-level dark creature. However, what the little skull was doing below immediately shattered his understanding. As soon as Gabriel finished speaking, the left eye of the little skull, who had been standing behind the window, suddenly lit up with a purple light. He leapt out of the window and faced Gabriel's provocation head-on. The 5 white bones on his right hand hooked, and the bone dagger on the ground suddenly flew up with a whoosh and landed in his bony claw like lightning. Gabriel couldn't react for a moment. He stared at the little skull in disbelief and was momentarily stunned. At this moment, something even more shocking happened. He saw the little skull bend his body, and the 7 bone spurs on his back suddenly flew out and shot towards him like 7 bolts of lightning. "Oh my God!" A cry of surprise that only Gabriel could hear came from his mouth. Gabriel then once again became a passive defender. He condensed his silver fighting aura on his longsword and formed a tight defense around him, bitterly resisting the 7 bone spurs' flying attacks. The little skull wielding the bone dagger danced as he dashed into the attacking mercenaries. The miraculous little skull revealed his cruel side. With a bend of his leg bone and a flick, the little skull's body was like a bolt of lightning as he landed in the midst of these people. The bone claw in his empty left hand suddenly stabbed out, and with a pu sound, 5 bloody holes appeared in the chest of a middle-ranked swordsman. Blood flowed out like a fountain. With a swing of the bone dagger in his right hand, the head of a nearby mercenary flew high up from his neck. Blood sprayed everywhere from the decapitated neck, dyeing the white bones of the little skull a bewitching blood red. 2 arrows whizzed through the air and hit the bones of the little skull's back and chest with a dang-dang sound. The 2 arrows fell to the ground with a clatter sound, but there were only 2 white scratch marks on the bones of the little skull's chest and back. The 2 arrows didn't seem to have harmed the little skeleton, but the little skeleton was affected as well. His body, which had been moving swiftly, couldn't help but stagger a bit when he was hit by 2 arrows from the front and 1 from the back. A few mercenaries nearby took advantage of this opportunity to greet him with their swords and spears. For a moment, dang-dang sounds came from his white bones. This series of attacks seemed to have stunned the little skull. Even the miraculous manipulation of the 7 bone spurs had suddenly stopped. The 7 bone spurs that were originally flying around Gabriel and attacking him spun uncontrollably and hit an azura stone pillar to the side with a ding-dang-dang sound. As if they had triggered some sort of restriction, a cold wind suddenly blew in the courtyard and a thick aura of death suddenly spread in all directions. The dark sky was covered by the aura of death, and not a single speck of starlight shone down. Only a blood-red evil light soared into the sky from the center. The 6 white bone pillars that had been deathly silent suddenly emitted a terrifying howl. The sharp howl, like the wails of ghosts and the howls of wolves, made one's scalp go numb. It was as if a malicious ghost was lying next to one's ear and licking one's earlobe with its blood-red tongue. Some of the ghostly images on the stone pillars came to life in an instant, each of them bearing their fangs and brandishing their claws. The 6 stone pillars seemed to have become 6 evil beasts with thousands of tentacles, constantly waving all kinds of ghostly claws and attacking all living things in the surroundings. "Hurry and hide," Emily yelled when she saw that the demonic formation in the courtyard had been triggered. The few people who already knew what was going on had already started moving when Emily cried out in alarm. They hurriedly stood in the safe spots that Han Shoror had instructed them to. Footsteps sounded again from outside. Another dozen or so people from the Cairo mercenary band had been standing guard around the shop. They couldn't help but rush in when they saw that they hadn't taken care of the people inside after so long. They all stood in the courtyard. Dark Grand Magus Edwin and the Calamity Church's female alchemist Belinda stood together on a large tree 3 shops away. They looked at the place where the blood-red light was flashing and the ghostly winds were howling. Can it be that the legendary curse of the evil god has really happened? Belinda's eyes were filled with shock as she spoke to Edwin. I don't know, the presence inside is very strange. Even I don't know what's going on. Let's not go near for now and see what's going on first. Edwin shook his head in confusion. Chapter 212. What's going on? What's going on? I can't see anything. Someone's attacking me. What's going on with this courtyard? Everyone be careful. This is the strangest place in the Valley of Sunshine. The evil god's curse must have flared up. Retreat. Everyone leave the courtyard. No one will be able to escape once the evil god's curse flares up. Panicked shouts rang out from the mouths of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band members who'd entered the courtyard. These people had obviously heard of the legend of this shop, and when they saw the sudden change, they all tried to leave immediately, trembling with fear. However, the first illusory formation had already begun to take effect as soon as the formation had been activated. Apart from Emily and the others who'd chosen a safe spot to stand in, everyone else from the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band who'd rashly barged in couldn't see their surroundings clearly under the dense aura of death. Under these circumstances, a few white shadows suddenly shot out from the deep well in the center of the courtyard. The water ghosts sensed the presence of living people and started attacking the mercenaries next to them without hesitation. In that instant, the 3 mercenaries felt a chill in their bodies, as if a liquid had invaded their bodies. In a trance, their minds were muddled, as if they'd been tempted by a voice. They couldn't help but jump into the deep well one after another. With 3 plopping sounds, the 3 of them jumped into the well of their own accord. When they sensed the cold well water, Their muddled minds immediately regained clarity. When they wanted to climb out of the well without a care for anything else, their bodies were already completely out of their control. They couldn't move a single step in the well, and instead sank bit by bit. 3 despairing shouts suddenly rang out from the well. The voices were filled with boundless terror and despair, causing the scalps of the mercenaries in the courtyard to go numb. It was also at this moment that they finally realized that this courtyard was indeed filled with many unknown dangers. It was with this realization that they immediately gave up on the idea of staying here. Each of them moved quickly in the courtyard according to their memories, trying to leave this evil and dangerous place as fast as possible. However, the courtyard, which was not very wide, suddenly became infinitely long and distant. They retreated according to their own memories. Their flying bodies should have left this place long ago, but unfortunately, they could never feel the end. Shrill howls like ghosts and howls like wolves continued to scream in their ears. The illusions suddenly attacked them, and another version of themselves appeared in front of them. Holding a sharp weapon in their hand and wearing a hideous smile on their face, they began to attack them mercilessly. The fear brought about by this phenomenon instantly destroyed their willpower, causing their fighting spirit to completely collapse. Screaming in fear, crying helplessly, and waving the weapons in their hands indiscriminately. In an instant, all the mercenaries inside fell into a state of madness and irritation. Facing his other self's cruel attack, no matter how determined the mercenary was, he still found it hard to accept it. He was equally terrified and agitated as if he had gone mad. Just like that, all of the Rainbow Sickle mercenaries that had entered the courtyard went crazy in an instant and started to fight amongst themselves. Cries of despair, screams of extreme pain, and the sounds of metal clashing rang out from every corner of the courtyard. Emily and the other 3, who were in a few safe spots, had their vision affected and couldn't see what was happening in the courtyard at all. However, the mixed cries and screams made them realize that the Rainbow Sickle mercenaries were currently in an unforgettable situation. More often than not, a shrill scream would abruptly stop, signifying the disappearance of a life. Afterwards, they could see a wisp of grey air being absorbed by the Shura pillars beside them. As the souls disappeared one by one, the Shura pillars that had absorbed these souls seemed to provide an even greater amount of evil energy to the formation in the courtyard, causing the chilly winds in the courtyard to grow stronger and the aura of death to spread faster and thicker. Andy and the Thunder Archmage could only watch helplessly as the strange changes occurred in the courtyard. The thick aura of death covered the sky above the courtyard, and apart from a beam of blood-red light shooting into the sky from the center, there was nothing else that they could see. Just like Emily and the others, the sounds of despair and helplessness continued to reverberate in their ears. Unlike Emily and the others, Andy and the other mage felt their scalps go numb and their hearts tremble. They didn't dare cast their fire and thunder magic recklessly because they couldn't distinguish their targets. They could only stand anxiously on the roof, scratching their ears and cheeks as they tried to find a suitable solution. While everyone's vision was affected, Little Skull, who had been standing in the center of the courtyard, had his purple left eye flash with a strong light. He was like a graceful gentleman strolling leisurely through a ball. Little Skull wielded the bone dagger in his hand and took a brisk pace as he walked unhurriedly through the mercenaries who had fallen into a state of frenzy and were waving their blades wildly. As he reached out with his left bony claw, 5 bloody holes appeared on the bodies of the mercenaries, or their necks were directly twisted off. The bone dagger flashed with a cold light as it drew a beautiful arc in the air, ending with a mournful scream. This meant that a life had been lost. As the attacking mercenaries fell one by one, the great swordmaster Gabriel became Little Skull's final target. Gabriel was much more difficult to deal with than he'd imagined. The silver sword veil covered his surroundings, and his eyebrows twitched. Although he was also affected by the formation, he didn't rush to attack everything around him, and only firmly defended his position. It was this extremely conservative approach that caused him to receive the weakest attacks. The mercenaries who were close to him were all blocked by the sword light due to the difference in strength between them. However, these mercenaries either killed each other or were easily slaughtered by Little Skull. Gabriel's body wasn't affected much apart from the severe loss of fighting aura. When Little Skull got close to Gabriel, It wasn't that easy to take Gabriel's life with the same method. With the attitude that he didn't want to make any mistakes, Great Swordmaster Gabriel firmly defended his position, condensing his silver fighting aura into a screen and tightly defending himself. When Little Skull arrived, he was also helpless against the Great Swordmaster's pure defense. Beside Gabriel, Little Skull rubbed his smooth skull in annoyance. His purple demon eye spun as he seemed to be thinking of a good countermeasure. Who dares ignore the existence of the Cairo mercenary band and commit murder in Tanai? Lawton's explosive roar came from afar, sweeping over like the great waves of the ocean. Following Lawton's explosive roar, the sound of heavy footsteps rapidly approached from afar. Not good, the thunder monster is here, we have to retreat immediately. The thunder archmage on the roof suddenly called out lowly. But Gabriel is still down there. Andy also had a face full of anxiety as he looked worriedly at the yard below and called out softly. We can't care about that anymore. If we don't leave now, we won't be able to leave when the thunder monster arrives. Of course, if you want to die, I won't let you stay either. The thunder archmage said faintly and didn't look at Andy again. He used the levitation spell to rise into the air and fly off into the distance. Andy froze for a while and finally shook his head helplessly. He stomped his foot and also used the levitation spell to fly off, following behind the thunder archmage and disappearing into the night. After Andy and the thunder archmage left, Edwin and Belinda silently followed from a nearby tree. At this moment, the aura of death and yin in the yard was quickly absorbed by the 6 stone pillars. Starlight reappeared in the yard in an extremely short amount of time, and the effects of the formation had been withdrawn. Apart from the corpses littering the ground, only Gabriel was left, still brandishing his sword. Kill him! Gilbert suddenly yelled out and grabbed a battle axe from a mercenary's corpse, rushing towards Gabriel with a howl. Belinda and Trunks also knew that this was a rare opportunity. They brandished their weapons at the same time and rushed towards Gabriel as fast as they could, combining the strength of Little Skull Gilbert to launch fierce attacks at Gabriel. Gabriel reacted quickly when the threat of the formation had disappeared. He only needed to take a quick look at the surroundings to know that this operation had completely failed. Gabriel moved without any hesitation and leapt towards the roof. It was also at this moment that the attacks of Gilbert and the others arrived. Gabriel waved his long sword and silver fighting aura flared up, sending the rocks on the roof flying to block the attacks behind him. The flying battle axe blocked a large chunk of the rocks with a series of explosions. The bone dagger whistled through the air, not only shattering the remaining rocks, but also posing a great threat to Gabriel. When the long sword swung, an arc of light suddenly appeared and finally pushed Little Skull's bone dagger to the side. However, the 2 waves of fighting aura from Trunks and Phoebe finally reached Gabriel. A ghastly cry rang out from Gabriel's mouth as he staggered. His rapidly flying body suddenly became crisscrossed with sword marks, and it was obvious that he'd been seriously injured. He spat out large mouthfuls of blood as he fled in a panic. Emily had used a levitation spell to take to the air and was just about to chant a dark magic spell to give Gabriel the final blow when a fierce arrow shot out from nowhere like a bolt of cold lightning. The arrow was swift and carried with it a cold aura. Emily could already feel the icy aura contained in the arrow even before it neared her. Emily had been about to chant an offensive spell when she abruptly stopped herself. Her body that had been flying towards the roof suddenly dropped down from the air. However, that cold arrow was still relentless. It carried with it a frightening coldness and viciousness as it shot towards Emily's slender, white neck like a bolt of lightning. At this moment, there was no time to chant any spells. Gilbert and the others were all in the courtyard, and the ferocious attack had just been launched. Be it speed or combat aura, they couldn't save Emily in a short time. The person who had shot this arrow had a grasp and understanding of timing that had reached the pinnacle of perfection. The arrow that had been infused with ice magic was fast beyond imagination, and so vicious that it made one's heart tremble. Despair was written all over Emily's pretty face as she lost all hope and illusions in that moment. There was only one thought left in her mind: am I going to die? However, there were no absolutes in this world. In this moment of certain death, a red light that tore through the dark void appeared next to Emily and accurately struck the arrow that was about to take her life. There was a crack as the arrow shattered inch by inch. The frigid aura was unable to condense in that instant and instantly spread in all directions. Emily paced back and forth on the bridge of helplessness, her heart filled with the ecstasy of surviving a calamity. When she focused her attention on the front, she saw the demon slayer Edge hovering in front of her. In that instant, incomparably satisfied happiness filled her heart like giant waves. Emily's deep love for Han Shoror at this moment was as deep as the boundless ocean. "You won't be so lucky next time." A cold and delicate voice came from afar. A slender figure flew away from the roof of the row of houses, like a swan dancing in the lake. Trunks and the others were unable to restrain their anger as they all leapt up and landed on the rooftops, intending to take down this extremely dangerous female archer. "Don't chase." At this moment, Han Shoror's low voice sounded from within the room. The room door opened and a sinister-looking Han Shoror appeared. His entire body glowed with bloody light, and a thick killing intent emanated from his body. His pupils were blood red, and his expression was evil and callous to the extreme. He was like an evil god from hell that had broken through his shackles and descended upon the mortal world. At this moment, Emily, Trunks, and the others were completely shocked by Han Shoror's current appearance and aura. They all subconsciously stopped in their tracks and looked at Han Shoror with a somewhat unfamiliar expression. The current Han Shoror's aura and expression were too evil, completely different from his usual behavior. Chapter 213. Taking a deep breath, Han Shoror forcibly suppressed his raging bloodlust. The urge to go on a killing spree slowly subsided as he took a few deep breaths. In the eyes of Trunks and the others, as Han Shoror took a few deep breaths, his originally callous and bloodthirsty appearance, specks of bloody light, and ferocious killing intent slowly disappeared without a trace. In the end, he once again returned to the appearance they were familiar with. "What's wrong with you?" Emily let out a sigh of relief when she saw that Han Shoror had returned to normal. Her beautiful eyes focused on Han Shoror with worry as she asked hastily, "My martial arts technique has just reached an unfamiliar realm. It's the hardest to control one's mental state in this realm. I'm not familiar with this new realm yet, so I lost my composure a bit." Han Shoror's expression returned to normal as he revealed a faint smile and explained to everyone, "You gave me a fright. Your expression and aura just now were extremely evil and terrifying. It made my heart tremble just looking at you." Trunks looked deeply at Han Shoror and said with lingering fear. The little skeleton was the only one who didn't show any signs of abnormality. When he saw Han Shoror appear, the little skeleton waved his arms and legs in joy, gesticulating something. From time to time, he would point at the corpses all over the ground, as if telling Han Shoror about his accomplishments. Chuckling in relief, Han Shoror could feel Little Skull's desire to show off, as if waiting for Han Shoror's praise. "Come here, stinking brat. Not bad." He waved his hand and waited for the little skeleton to obediently walk towards Han Shoror with the bone dagger in hand. Han Shoror reached out and rubbed the little skeleton's smooth, jade-like skull. The little skeleton's purple left eye swiveled about as he smacked his white jaw repeatedly. He appeared to be very satisfied. "Honored master, you're so biased. You've never treated me so kindly before," Gilbert complained when he saw Han Shoror spoiling Little Skull so much. Little Skull had been by Han Shoror's side ever since he was still an errand boy. In the beginning, he'd just been throwing away junk and helping Han Shoror with some trivial matters. As Little Skull grew stronger, he'd helped Han Shoror deal with a few crises. This kind of relationship wasn't something that Gilbert could compare to. Han Shoror glanced at Gilbert and was about to say something when he suddenly creased his brows and cast his gaze towards the door he'd come in from. Lawton of the Cairo mercenary band was like an iron tower as he walked through the door. Harris and a group of experts followed behind him. Lawton had a burly figure, and his weight was probably a bit heavier than a warhorse. His footsteps made dull thumps as he walked. "What's going on? Where are the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band?" Lawton yelled out in a voice as loud as a bell. Pointing at the corpses all over the ground, Han Shoror smiled. "Aren't they all on the ground?" Lawton's brow furrowed when he heard these words and focused his attention on the ground. He opened his mouth to list the names one by one as if he was reciting his family's treasures: Angelo, Terige, Gilia. His expression was replaced with astonishment when he heard Lawton's words. When he finally lifted his head to look at Han Shoror, his face was full of shock as he said, "You killed all of them? Perhaps the curse of the evil god may have helped us." Han Shoror smiled mysteriously and shrugged his shoulders as he replied carelessly, "These people are indeed from the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band, and some of them are even the core members of the band. I hadn't thought that you would be able to kill so many experts. You've truly helped us greatly." Harris couldn't conceal the excitement on his face when he walked in, and even his voice sounded a bit louder than usual. "Just what's going on?" Lawton was greatly puzzled by Han Shoror's answer and couldn't help but ask. "Lawton, you're late. You only arrived after the battle had ended. It looks like your Cairo mercenary band isn't as fast as we'd imagined." Trunks flicked a glance at Han Shoror and spoke on behalf of Han Shoror. "Trunks, you also know that every place in the Valley of Sunshine needs to be guarded. Our Cairo mercenary band couldn't possibly have stationed most of our men here just for this place," Lawton said, and then snorted coldly with an annoyed expression. "Florida is too arrogant. How dare he ignore our existence? Those who ambushed you didn't even bother to hide their faces. It's obvious that they don't care about us at all. Chief Lawton, I hope you'll be a bit more timely next time. The matters here have already concluded and there's likely nothing else worth your attention." Han Shoror suddenly thought of something after saying this and looked at Lawton with a frown. "There's a great swordmaster called Gabriel amongst those who ambushed us this time. He's one of Asher's men, the chief of the Griffin Legion in nearby Valin City. I don't know if the Cairo mercenary band is connected to Asher. I hope you'll pay attention." "Great Swordmaster Gabriel!" Lawton cried out in surprise. He obviously didn't know of this matter and his expression was a bit grave. Nodding, Han Shoror said, "Correct, this person is the master of Asher's eldest son, Clark. He's always been by Asher's side. I hadn't thought that he'd leave Asher this time and mix with the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band. Don't worry, I'll investigate all of this. Alright, if there's nothing else, we'll be leaving first." Lawton's face darkened and he seemed to be thinking about something as he said a bit anxiously, "Wait, I've left the Valley of Sunshine for too long and don't know much about Florida's strength. It's best if you can give us detailed information on the experts and strength of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band." A Thunder Archmage and a female archer with amazing archery appeared today. One of our companions was almost injured by the female archer this time. "We need detailed information on the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band." Trunks hastily spoke up when he saw that Lawton was about to leave. "Female archer," Lawton cried out once again and then said gravely, "Then it must be the female elf Maxine. She's a divine archer proficient in water, thunder, and wind magic. She can fuse all three elements into her archery and shoot arrows with terrifying power. This woman is very difficult to deal with. It's said that she's a fiancée that Florida's grandfather found for him. Her origins are very mysterious and she doesn't seem to have a harmonious relationship with Florida. She hasn't spent much time in the Valley of Sunshine in the past few years, but she'll still lend a hand whenever the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band is in danger. It looks like she's back. Who's that Thunder Archmage?" It was Emily's turn to ask this time. "He's called Asa and joined the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band half a year ago. I'm not too sure of his origins, but he's vicious and merciless. He gets along well with Florida. He's taken care of some of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band's shady dealings in the past half a year. He's deeply trusted and thought highly of by Florida." Lawton seemed to be quite familiar with the experts of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band. He didn't hesitate at all when faced with Trunks and Emily's questions and explained in great detail. "Apart from these two, what other experts have joined the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band in the past few years?" Trunks continued to ask. Lawton furrowed his brow and mused for a moment. He turned his head to look at Harris and said, "Give them a copy of the information we've gathered." Harris started and then nodded. He took out a scroll from his space ring and handed it to Trunks. "There's some information on the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band here. It should be more detailed than what Miss Emily knows. It looked like Harris and the others already knew Emily's identity. Tarnai was the true ruler of the Valley of Sunshine, and the identities of some people couldn't be hidden from them. Trunks glanced at the scroll and nodded at Han Shoror. He then smiled at Lawton. It's very detailed. We'll help you take care of Florida before the Great War. If that's really the case, I'll be very grateful to you. Not only will I give this shop to you unconditionally, but Miss Phoebe's Merchant Guild will also be exempt from all taxes in Tarnai. Lawton laughed heartily and turned to walk outside with large strides. Behind him, Harris looked at Trunks and reminded, the back of the scroll is a map of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band's residence. There are detailed notes on the hidden and open sentries. Destroy this scroll after you've seen it. Don't let it fall into the hands of others, lest it cause unnecessary trouble. Nodding in understanding, Trunks smiled coldly. Don't worry, I know what to do. Harris and Trunks had known each other for a long time and naturally knew of the irreconcilable hatred between Trunks and Florida. He finally said, good luck. After Lawton and the others left the shop, Han Shoror said lowly, Lawton has a good plan, but we can't follow his plans if we want to gain a foothold in the Valley of Sunshine. Tarnai doesn't just have the Cairo Mercenary Band and the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band. I know that there are a few other powers that aren't small either. I think they want to replace the Cairo Mercenary Band's position and take control of the Valley of Sunshine. Trunks started and then asked Han Shoror, what do you want to do? Chuckling darkly, Han Shoror looked up at the sky and murmured to himself, it's a dark and windy night today. The Valley of Sunshine has already been in chaos for a while. I'll make use of this opportunity to make it even more chaotic. Chapter 214. Inglorious Tarnai. Apart from the strongest Cairo Mercenary Band and the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band, there were also the slightly weaker House of Menlo and the Carter Orc tribe. It was said that the House of Menlo was originally a great noble of a small country. They had their own private army and wanted to rebel against the small country, but failed in the end when their plans were exposed. After the battle with the royal army of the small country, the House of Menlo threw away their armor and fled. With their strength greatly reduced, they finally arrived at the Valley of Sunshine. When they arrived at the Valley of Sunshine, they only had 300 soldiers. However, during the chaos of war, the House of Menlo had looted a large amount of wealth from the nobles of that small country. When they arrived at the Valley of Sunshine, they used this fortune to recruit over 1,000 experts of various professions in a few short years. Their strength was only second to the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band. The House of Menlo was currently the wealthiest power in the Valley of Sunshine. Patriarch Sawyer Menlo had always wanted to control the Valley of Sunshine, recruit more soldiers, and kill his way back to his homeland to obtain all the power in that country. The Carter Orc tribe was a small tribe of orcs. They had originally lived in the bitterly cold lands, but after many hardships, they had migrated to the Valley of Sunshine and lived in a mountain range near the Valley of Sunshine. There were only 500 to 600 orcs in this tribe, but each of them was a warrior that was extremely difficult to deal with. The orcs of the Carter tribe mainly earned enough commission by protecting orc merchants. It was said that the money they earned was all used to support their wives, children, and elders back home. This power wasn't too big or too small, but the current chief of the Carter tribe had always wanted to enter the Valley of Sunshine and obtain more benefits and gold coins by controlling the Valley of Sunshine. The Cairo Mercenary Band, the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band, the House of Menlo, and the Carter tribe were currently the 4 strongest powers in the Valley of Sunshine. Among them, the Cairo Mercenary Band was the strongest, with over 2,600 mercenaries proficient in battle. The Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band was second, but they also had around 2,000 mercenaries. Then came the House of Menlo's 1,500 soldiers, and finally the Carter tribe's 500 to 600 orc warriors. Out of the 4 powers, only the Cairo Mercenary Band that controlled the Valley of Sunshine was able to gather all of their troops in Tarnai. The other 3 powers had only set up a base in Tarnai, with all of their troops stationed in the mountain ranges around the Valley of Sunshine. This information wasn't difficult to obtain. Han Shoror had learned everything from Emily not long after he'd arrived in the Valley of Sunshine. It was clear to everyone that the four powers didn't get along with each other. Each power wanted to occupy the Valley of Sunshine and use its enormous resources to quickly increase their own strength in order to obtain greater benefits. The Cairo mercenary band, which originally only had 1,000 people, had more than doubled their numbers in the short span of a few years after they'd taken control of the Valley of Sunshine. This was all because they'd obtained a large sum of gold coins after taking control of the Valley of Sunshine and attracted even more experts to join them. To the Cairo mercenary band, it was an excellent idea to greatly reduce the strength of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band without harming their own strength. Comparing a mere shop to the Valley of Sunshine, this deal was a huge profit no matter how one looked at it. It was because he understood the situation in the Valley of Sunshine that Han Shoror's heart was filled with ambition. That was why he'd started to think for himself and for the mercenary band that he'd just established. Trunks, take your old comrades and make a trip to the House of Menlo. Cover your faces and stir up some trouble tonight. Kill a few people and set a few fires. Han Shoror looked at Trunks and said with a smile. You're saying to make the House of Menlo think that another power did it? Trunks' expression changed as he asked. They definitely won't suspect us if the House of Menlo is attacked because we don't have the strength to do so. There's no need to make them our enemy. They'll definitely suspect the other three powers in the end. Han Shoror explained. Trunks nodded and a trace of a sinister smile hung on his face. I think I'm up to the task. I've long since gotten used to the open and veiled struggles among these powers when I was in the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. All right then, be careful. As long as you don't expose your identities, do your best to wreak havoc. Han Shoror chuckled. Trunks didn't say anything else and hurriedly left under the cover of the night. It looked like he was planning on making a move tonight. After Trunks left, Han Shoror said darkly to Emily and the others, since the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band has already made a move against us, we can't let them look down on us, can we? Come, let's take a stroll around as well. We'll go to the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band and kill a few people for fun. Now that Han Shoror's group had a good relationship with the Cairo mercenary band, it was very convenient for them to enter and exit the Valley of Sunshine. However, Han Shoror's group didn't leave through the main gates of the Valley of Sunshine this time. Instead, they used Gilbert's ability to fly after transforming into a dragon to fly out of a secluded area in the Valley of Sunshine. The Valley of Sunshine had its own rules. Under normal circumstances, even archmages who could fly couldn't use the levitation spell to enter and exit the Valley of Sunshine. If they were discovered by the Cairo mercenary band, they would be detained and interrogated. The moonlight was like water as it sprinkled down on the vast expanse of white. The accumulated snow hadn't melted yet, and the snow-covered mountains and towering ancient trees displayed a different kind of beauty under the moonlight. The Rainbow Sickle mercenary band was located in a small mountain valley to the east of the Valley of Sunshine. Han Shoror and the others, who were riding on Gilbert, could see Tanai on the small mountain in the distance. There were rows of short houses built with red tiles. There was a medium-sized hot spring in the center of the small mountain valley. Steaming hot mist floated above the water, enveloping the small mountain valley in a white mist. There were many fresh flowers and plants planted around the hot spring. Because it was close to the hot spring, the surrounding plants weren't affected by the cold winter and actually bloomed with many beautiful flowers. Strong and sturdy mercenaries were scattered around the small valley, looking around cautiously. They were always on the lookout for an enemy invasion. On a cliff above the mountain valley, Han Shoror had Gilbert stop. Han Shoror smiled coldly as he looked at the small mountain valley below. Perhaps someone will make a move earlier this time. Phoebe and Emily both revealed puzzled expressions when they heard these words. They looked at Han Shoror in confusion, and it was Phoebe who asked, "What's going on?" Dark Grand Magus Edwin and that female alchemist Belinda of the Calamity Church were watching from a distance when I was in the shop. Before I stopped my cultivation, I sensed their location. When Andy and his companion left, they chased after Andy. Edwin and Belinda followed behind Andy first, and then Gabriel and the female archer Maxine. Edwin and Belinda should be in the mountain valley below now. If they've come to kill Florida, then they've helped us greatly. Han Shoror responded slowly as he looked at the mountain valley below. Then what should we do now? She didn't know when it had started, but with Han Shoror around, Emily had gotten used to letting Han Shoror decide everything. Lifting his head to look at the sky, Han Shoror said, "Only half of the long night has passed. We still have a lot of time, so why don't we wait for a while?" Time flew by, and after roughly half an hour, intense magical pulses suddenly emanated from the grandest red-tiled house in the center of the small mountain valley below. Under the cool moonlight, an armored puppet beast that looked like a three-eyed evil god suddenly appeared out of thin air. It was made of black iron armor. The golem's enormous body charged straight for the magnificent building as soon as it appeared, and a thick iron tail swept out, sending the red-tiled house's tiles flying and rumbling. At the same time, an earth-shattering rumble came from the place where the strong magical wave was. 3 hands of death appeared out of thin air and floated into the magnificent building through the window, wantonly destroying everything inside. "Edwin and the others have made their move, we can't just sit around either." Han Shoror chuckled coldly as the murderous aura around him grew thicker. The evil and merciless expression from before once again appeared on his face. "Honorable Master, what should I do?" Gilbert was excited once again. His dragon-shaped voice was loud and resonant. "Carry the 2 of them and fly above the valley. Do your best to destroy all the buildings in the valley, and spit out all the poison and flames. Immediately fly away from the Valley of Sunshine if you encounter any attacks that might harm you. Don't wait for me, no one can stop me if I want to leave." Han Shoror's expression was cold and savage as he laughed wildly and dove down like a hawk. A bloody light flickered from his body as his eyes turned blood red. "He'll be fine, right?" When Han Shoror had flown down, Phoebe had already discovered Han Shoror's strangeness and couldn't help but ask Emily. "Do as he says." Emily responded and stomped her foot, urging Gilbert, "Dark Dragon, what are you waiting for?" A small, skinny figure followed Han Shoror at this moment and floated down through the air. The little skeleton flailed his arms and legs as he flew down, like a kite with a broken string. However, the 7 bone spurs on his back swayed back and forth midway, stabilizing his swaying body. He followed closely behind Han Shoror in a strange trajectory as he descended into the mountain valley. Chapter 215. In the bloodthirsty realm, demonic cultivators were extremely easily angered and irritable. Only in the midst of bloodthirsty slaughter could one comprehend the mysteries of this realm. Only in the midst of bloodthirsty slaughter could a demonic cultivator clearly understand themselves. If one wanted to break through this realm, endless slaughter was the fastest way. However, it was extremely easy for demonic practitioners to go berserk in the midst of slaughter. If one wasn't careful and lost control of their mind, it would be difficult to recover, and they would completely devolve into a lunatic monster that only had the instinct to kill. Therefore, it was extremely difficult to control oneself in this realm. Slaughter was the fastest way to break through, but it could also be a path of no return. When Han Shoror had flown down from the cliff, his hatred towards Florida had increased immeasurably, including the female archer called Maxine, who had almost dealt a fatal blow to Emily. His heart, which had calmed down, now beat much faster than usual. His magical yuan was abundant, and the demon infant was filled with a surging vitality. After the demon infant had absorbed the pure power of the soul contained within the purple demon eye, Han Shoror's stagnant true demon realm had broken through. Although Han Shoror had thoughts of going on a killing spree from time to time after reaching the bloodlust realm, his strength had indeed increased by leaps and bounds. Now, even if Florida was at his peak, Han Shoror still had the confidence to kill him head-on. Even if he didn't make use of the speed of the art of the demonic ninth heavens, Han Shoror was confident that he could fight Edwin and escape unscathed. A murderous aura appeared in the form of a dense black mist, curling around Han Shoror's body. The swooping Han Shoror looked like a black cloud from afar as he dove down. There were 2 blood-red eyes within the cloud, and the eerie, sinister light within was enough to make one's heart tremble. At this moment, Tanai Mountain had long since fallen into chaos due to Edwin and Belinda's actions. Edwin and Belinda had joined hands and were dealing a destructive blow to the magnificent building, seeming to want to raze it to the ground. From Harris' scroll, Han Shore knew that the magnificent building was where Florida of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band lived. It looked like Edwin's trip to the Cairo Mercenary Band had been fruitful. Without Lawton's help, the two who'd just arrived in the Valley of Sunshine wouldn't have been so familiar with the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band's setup. Amidst the deafening rumbling sounds, a pitch-black shadow descended from the sky. A baleful aura was so dense that no one dared to ignore it. The experts of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band had been frantically gathering their men to deal with Edwin and Selena when they discovered the abnormality in the sky. Arrows, spears, and javelins had already shot into the sky like lightning bolts. However, none of the dozens of attacks that shot towards the Black Shadow could get close to it. The Black Shadow quickly chanted a necromancy spell as it flew down. A black light flashed through the sky as a troop of gargoyles appeared out of thin air. These gargoyles wielded bone spears and lined up neatly in front of the Black Shadow. They tightly blocked the arrows, spears, and javelins. Suddenly, a huge jet-black sky curtain rapidly unfolded behind the black figure, blocking the bright moonlight and causing a third of the entire valley to be shrouded in darkness. A thick aura of death suddenly spread out endlessly. Everyone within the aura of death felt that their bodies were a lot more stiff than usual. The Black Shadow landed in the mountain valley under the cover of the black canopy, and dark creatures appeared one after another. The moonlight was covered by the dark blue clouds, making it impossible to judge the time. No one knew how much longer it would be until daybreak. As a lost necromancy spell, the canopy of necromancy had the effect of diminishing the fighting strength of enemies within its range. Within the range of the canopy of necromancy, all dark creatures could obtain more power and possess greater speed and strength through absorbing the thick aura of death around them. This was an evil spell that reduced the opponent's strength and increased the fighting strength of dark creatures. It had been forgotten on the continent after it had disappeared from the cemetery of death. When Han Shore's spell appeared and the dark creatures began to excitedly attack their surroundings, not only did the Rainbow Sickle mercenaries lose their agility, their eyes also felt abnormally dry and their vision was affected. Belinda, which other necromancer has come apart from Clarendon? Edwin had been casting dark magic when he saw that the moonlight had been covered by the dark blue clouds and the dark creatures were excitedly attacking the mercenaries around them. He asked Belinda, who was controlling the golem beside him. Shaking her head, Belinda had a face full of confusion as she responded, "Clarendon has already been taken care of. There shouldn't be any other necromancers apart from him." Edwin started when he heard these words and then smiled faintly. Then perhaps the higher-ups have sent someone else over. Even I've never seen such a mysterious necromancy spell before. I don't think any other necromancer can use it apart from our Calamity Church. Of course, only our Calamity Church would possess such mysterious necromancy magic. He must be one of us. Belinda believed Edwin's words without a shred of doubt. It looked like they had an unreasonable amount of confidence in the Calamity Church's strength. "I'm Edwin. Which old friend has come?" Edwin, who had been casting dark magic, couldn't help but call out in a friendly manner when he saw that some dark creatures were helping the two of them block the mercenaries around them because of Han Shore's appearance. A vast amount of mental strength had been mostly used up because of the canopy of necromancy and the summoning of 50 to 60 dark creatures of different levels. As the 50 to 60 dark creatures wantonly attacked everything within the range of the canopy of necromancy, Han Shore, who'd sunk into a berserk state of bloodlust, became a cruel shadow that wantonly vented his rage. A thirst for blood pushed Han Shore into the midst of endless slaughter like the unending river waters. The mercenaries who weren't strong enough were instantly cut in half by the sharp demon slayer edge wherever the dark shadow passed, fresh blood spurting out. Han Shore's eyes had turned blood red, and he couldn't control his desire to destroy everything. He killed all who stood in his way, like a machine reaping lives. All the mercenaries in the surroundings were met with terrifying attacks one after another. Han Shore's body froze slightly when he heard Edwin's friendly words, but he ignored him. When he looked around, he discovered that there was no one else apart from the little skull following closely behind him. In the bloodlust realm, Han Shoror's physical strength had reached the pinnacle. He could instinctively sense the dangers around him amidst the continuous slaughter. He could even clearly sense the fear and trembling of those far away. Every time Han Shoror killed a person, the person's fear and resentment at death's door would form a ball of air that was hard to see with the naked eye, and be absorbed by the killing intent around Han Shoror. As more and more mercenaries were killed by Han Shoror, the killing intent around Han Shoror's body grew thicker and thicker, to the point that the thick scent of blood emanated from his pores. Han Shoror's physical body and magical yuan seemed to be continuously refined in this process. Han Shoror could feel that his strength was increasing bit by bit in this process. On the contrary, as his physical body and magical yuan rapidly increased, Han Shoror's mind became more and more muddled. When the fear and resentment of those he'd killed were absorbed into his surroundings, the enormous amount of information seemed to affect Han Shoror's brain, causing the veins on Han Shoror's head to bulge. He felt as if he was about to go berserk. Cursing inwardly, Han Shoror immediately understood after obtaining all of Chu Kanglan's memories that in the bloodlust realm, if there were such muddled signs in one's mind, the desire to kill everyone and destroy everything in their surroundings would increase. This was a sign that one was about to go berserk. After experiencing hundreds of times of pain, Han Shoror's indomitable willpower had long since been tempered into indomitable willpower. The Demon Slayer edge was forcibly put away into Han Shoror's storage ring. Han Shoror took advantage of the fact that he was still conscious to continuously calm his raging heart and immediately sat down cross-legged, ignoring the chaos in his surroundings. Little Skull, who had been following beside Han Shoror and helping Han Shoror reap lives, suddenly flashed his purple demon eye when he saw Han Shoror suddenly sit down. He waved his hand at the dark creatures in the distance. Like a broken light bulb, the purple demon eye flickered and lit up with an evil purple light. It was as if a mysterious force was driving those dark creatures. When Little Skull waved his hand, the surrounding zombies and hate warriors all walked over in fear and trepidation, as if they were subordinates showing due respect to Little Skull. When facing Han Shoror, because of the summoning incantation, they could only rigidly and instinctively follow Han Shoror's orders. However, when Han Shoror sat down cross-legged and Little Skull summoned them, their expressions were filled with fear and reverence. Each and every one of them carefully surrounded Han Shoror, as if deeply afraid that Little Skull would be dissatisfied and blame them. They were like the most humble servants and slaves. This kind of behavior seemed to indicate that they had long since known of Little Skull, or had heard of Little Skull's tyrannical and miraculous abilities. Otherwise, how could an ordinary Little Skull warrior in this vast and boundless alternate dimension make them treat him with such fear? Perhaps, in another dimension infinitely far away, the Little Skull with 7 bone spurs on his back, a bone dagger in his hand, and a purple demon eye had already established a school of his own and become a famous character. Chapter 216. A third of the mountain valley was covered by the canopy of necromancy. Dark green clouds obscured all light as a thick aura of death wafted in all directions, giving the mercenaries within a strong sense of discomfort. In the center of the canopy of necromancy, Han Shoror, who'd experienced slaughter and found it hard to control his desires, couldn't stop his mind from sinking into a frenzy of slaughter due to the increasingly thick aura of violence in his body. However, his will, which had been tempered for a long time, was able to rein in at the most critical moment, forcefully stopping him from falling any further. Sitting down cross-legged, Han Shoror ignored the chaos around him and focused, slowly pacifying his deepest desires. 3 zombie warriors, 2 hate warriors, and 7 or 8 skeletal warriors stood around Han Shoror. Little Skull wielded a bone dagger as his purple demon eye glowed with purple light. He was like a general leading an army of thousands as he stood in front of Han Shoror with his head held high and chest puffed out, silently protecting Han Shoror. Under the combined efforts of Edwin and Belinda, the grandest building in the mountain valley finally collapsed with a boom. The earth-shattering sound shook the entire mountain valley. In that moment, the mercenaries of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band stationed far away, meditating or tirelessly training their swordplay, all realized that their base was under attack and swarmed towards the mountain valley. In the far distance, a group of knights clad in shining silver armor was charging towards them from atop their silver-armored warhorses. They were holding 3-meter-long javelins in their hands. A slender blue figure nimbly stepped onto the treetops on the snow-covered treetops, belatedly flying over. She wore a loose blue dress with a few fluttering ribbons that covered her face as she moved quickly. Only 2 long pointed ears were visible, revealing her identity as an elf. In another direction, Andy and the Thunder Archmage used the levitation spell under the moonlight to come to the rescue as fast as lightning, unable to disguise the panic on their faces. Who dares cause trouble for the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band? An angry roar shook the skies as the person at the front of the silver-armored knights roared out. Although his head was covered by a silver helmet, his roar still spread throughout the entire mountain valley. The Knights of Light are here. It looks like we should retreat. Belinda looked into the distance and spoke to Edwin beside her. Edwin nodded and was about to reply when he suddenly pointed at the sky in surprise. Who is that? Belinda couldn't help but look up in the direction of Edwin's finger. Although the canopy of necromancy was concealing them, the two of them still managed to make out an enormous black figure through the surging flames. It's that person's magical pet, a young black dragon. I didn't think that they'd come here as well. Belinda seemed to recall the humiliation she'd suffered earlier, and her voice was slightly gloomy as she replied. Hey, that's great. We don't have to leave immediately. If it hadn't been for Gilbert's group, then all of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band's attacks would have been aimed at them. Now that they had Gilbert to divert attention, the two of them naturally didn't have to bear all the pressure. In the air above the mountain valley, Gilbert made use of his swift flight speed to carry Emily and Phoebe on his back as he spat out scorching flames at the buildings below, drowning them in a sea of fire. Green venom sprayed out from some crowded areas, and the mercenaries all howled as they dodged in all directions. If they didn't make it in time and came into contact with even the slightest bit of the venom, they would die in an instant. Lowly life forms, you shouldn't have angered us. This is my, Gilbert's, punishment for your despicable actions. Gilbert's deep voice reverberated through the air above the mountain valley. He was so excited that he was dancing with joy, proud of his astonishing destructive power. Holy power of light, hear my call and dispel all darkness, radiance of light. An ancient and distant chant suddenly rang out in the chaotic mountain valley. All sorts of shouts and attacks were unable to drown out this chant. A strong beam of light tore through the heavens as the divine, holy element of light filled the air above the mountain valley. The dark green clouds created by the canopy of necromancy all disintegrated in an instant, vanishing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Dazzling light sprinkled all over the mountain valley, reflecting the gentle light of the stars. The holy power of light sprinkled down and quickly dispersed the presence of death. All the mercenaries in the mountain valley were no longer affected by it. Of the dark creatures summoned by Han Shoror, apart from the little skull who remained calm and unafraid, the other dark creatures of various ranks had their bodies rapidly corroded in an extremely short period of time. Each and every one of them revealed an expression of extreme agony as they frantically looked for cover to hide. The dark creatures that had originally been ordered by the little skull to protect Han Shoror were also in great pain, but they seemed to be very afraid of the little skull. Although their bodies were rapidly corroding, they didn't dare to leave immediately. Instead, they looked at the little skull with wide eyes, waiting for the little skull's forgiveness. Finally, the little skull waved his hand, and the dark creatures scattered with a crash. Each and every one of them hid under a house or found a random hole to burrow into, trying to avoid the radiance of radiance. As for the injured mercenaries, their injuries miraculously came under control after being illuminated by the radiance of radiance. Their spirits visibly improved, as if they'd been quickly healed. When the element of light filled the mountain valley, the situation was reversed in an instant. A white-haired but spirited old man dressed as a clergyman of the Church of Light surveyed Tarnai's surroundings with a bemoaning gaze. "He's here all right. I guessed that he'd come back after Florida was so heavily injured. Let's go, Florida must have been moved away by him. Otherwise, The building he lives in wouldn't have so little defense. Edwin stood in the shadows of a house and looked viciously at light Archmage Ferguson in the air as he yelled at Belinda. It'll be hard to leave if we're any later. Belinda understood just how strong Ferguson was and didn't hesitate at all. The golem had already turned into a streak of white light as soon as she'd finished speaking, disappearing into her scroll. On the other side, Dark Dragon Gilbert, who had just been shouting loudly, didn't utter a single word when he saw that the old man had turned the situation around with a powerful spell of light the moment he appeared. He quickly flew up into the sky without saying a word. Ferguson frowned at Gilbert's departure and chanted the simplest spell, Radiant Sword Slash. The enormous amount of light surrounding the mountain valley suddenly coalesced into 3 swords of light, shooting towards Gilbert with great speed. He turned around and spat out a stream of flames, stopping the 2 swords of light in their tracks. Emily hastily cast a hand of death to block the other sword of light, and the dragon and 2 women leapt out of the mountain valley, disappearing into the distance. After Ferguson released the lightsaber slash, a fierce light magic shockwave took shape. This magic shockwave took the form of a ring-shaped wave. Wherever it passed, the air would crackle and the ground would crack, leaving deep scratches on it. A building that occupied an area of 50 square meters was instantly crushed into rubble under the bombardment of this shockwave. Stone fragments flew everywhere. Old friend Edwin, I could smell that disgusting scent on you from far away. Come out. Ferguson called out softly in the direction of the attack after casting the blast of light magic. It looked like Gilbert wasn't Ferguson's main target, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to leave so easily. Edwin, who was of the same level and was quite familiar with each other, should be Ferguson's main target. Heh, I'm so happy to see you, but this place isn't suitable for me. Goodbye. Edwin's sinister laughter rang out from within the ruins. A black figure gradually faded away after his voice faded, disappearing from the ruins. I'll find you. Ferguson's face was calm and he didn't look happy or sad. His voice was also indifferent, devoid of anger or anger. There's another one down there. There's someone who's not afraid of death. Thunder Archmage Asa looked down in surprise and exclaimed. In the middle of a mountain valley filled with rubble, a figure glowing with a bloody light sat there indifferently. He was as steady as a boulder, as if he didn't care about everything that was happening around him. A short little skull with a purple left eye, wielding a bone dagger, 7 spikes on his back, and wielding a bone dagger stood unwaveringly by his side, as if protecting him from danger. It's him. This is the person who almost killed Florida in front of the Valley of Sunshine's fence. Fire Archmage Andy immediately cried out when he looked down. Everyone was shocked when they heard these words. All of them looked at Hanshaw in confusion. They couldn't understand why Hanshaw hadn't left at this time. Could it be that he thought he could take on all the experts of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band by himself? Could it be that he didn't know that there was a light Grand Magus in the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band? Surround him, I want him alive. There was finally a trace of anger in Ferguson's voice. No one knew if he was angry at Hanshaw for heavily injuring Florida, or at Hanshaw for looking down on all of them. Understood. The Knights of Light immediately surged forward from all directions upon hearing Ferguson's order, surrounding Hanshaw in 3 layers. In the sky were the 2 Archmages Andy and Asa, as well as the light Grand Magus Ferguson and the female archer Maxine. Only a sacred Magus, a sacred knight, or a sacred swordmaster would be able to leave so easily when surrounded by such a force. Hanshaw obviously wasn't one of these peak existences. As everyone stared at Hanshaw, light Grand Magus Ferguson's eyes suddenly lit up with an astonishing light. His previously calm face was suddenly filled with a strange expression. His white brow was furrowed tightly, the wrinkles on his forehead twitching as his lips smacked together. His expression was filled with incredulity and shock, as well as a few traces of deep worry and fear. Grandpa Ferguson, what's wrong? The female elven archer Maxine looked oddly at Ferguson from not too far away. Her exquisite and impeccable face was like the most perfect work of art. Maxine's appearance possessed all the advantages that an elven beauty should have. She had a slender and alluring figure, an extraordinary temperament, silky hair that was like a waterfall of oil green, and a breathtakingly beautiful face. All of these perfectly blended together to form a beauty that could topple cities of the elven race. On the other side, Edwin and Belinda stood side by side on a cliff above the valley where Han and the Dark Dragon had been standing. The expression on the Calamity Church's dark Grand Magus Edwin's face was astonishingly similar to Ferguson's. A frightening dark light shone from his eyes and focused on the little skull wielding the bone dagger. His expression was one of incredulity and shock, as if he'd found a priceless treasure. His lips trembled uncontrollably. "Grandmaster Edwin, what's wrong?" Belinda looked at Edwin with a baffled expression and asked the exact same question that Maxine had asked Ferguson. "That little skull, he's not afraid of the radiance of light." Ferguson and Edwin exclaimed almost at the same time with different emotions in their hearts. "I don't know how this person did it, but he must die now. He can't stay in this world for a second longer." This was the first time in so many years that Ferguson had made up his mind to kill someone. There was an unquestionable resolution in his words. On the other side, Edwin took a deep breath and said with wild joy, he must live no matter what. Light magic has always been the bane of necromancy magic for thousands of years. If the dark creatures of the necromancy magic can be unafraid of light magic, then the Calamity Church will completely reverse the situation. The Church of Light will find it difficult to stop our advance. Belinda immediately came to her senses when she heard these words. Her eyes were also filled with shock and joy. She looked at Edwin and said, "What should we do? We must save him at all costs. He must not die." Edwin said resolutely. He had never wanted to protect someone as much as he did at this moment. Chapter 217. Knights of Light, kill them immediately. This person and that dark creature cannot be allowed to remain in this world. Ferguson's expression was grave as he called out lowly. The Knights of Light who had just surrounded Han and had been planning on capturing Han alive were all a bit surprised when they heard that Ferguson had suddenly changed his mind. However, they only paused for a second and then decided to carry out Ferguson's orders obediently. Edwin didn't hesitate at the top of the cliff at the top of the mountain valley as he flew towards Han with Belinda. He planned on saving Han at all costs and finding out the secret behind why dark creatures didn't fear light magic. At this moment, Han who had been keeping his eyes closed all this time, suddenly opened his eyes. His cold gaze swept across the surroundings, revealing a strange smile. Han chanted the simplest necromancy magic and the little skull that had been guarding him without abandoning him disappeared without a trace under a streak of black light that cut through the sky. "Goodbye everyone." Han smiled faintly after the little skull had disappeared. As soon as he'd finished speaking, the murderous bloody light that had been circling around Han body suddenly shot into the 9 heavens. A powerful explosion sounded from Han direction. Violent explosions rang out one after another with Han at the center. The earth quaked and the mountains swayed as even the mountain valley trembled. Some of the Knights of Light who had been close to Han were caught off guard and were blasted into smithereens, blood and flesh flying far away. Edwin and Belinda, who had been rapidly descending, were startled when they saw the sudden commotion below them. Waves of evil blood-red light shot towards them in the sky, accompanied by violent booms. Their downward momentum came to a halt at this moment. Edwin used the levitation spell to grab Belinda and scrambled to avoid the bloodlight that shot into the sky. He then looked down at the violent changes below, his face full of shock and disbelief. When the dust had settled, an enormous hole that was 5 to 6 meters deep and 10 meters wide had appeared where Han had been sitting. The strong smell of blood, accompanied by the dark red air mass, drifted in all directions. The scorched ground was pitch black, and there were several badly mutilated corpses of the Knights of Light, just at the edge of the huge cave. However, Han who had been sitting cross-legged here, had disappeared without a trace. No matter how much the crowd gnashed their teeth and searched everywhere, they couldn't find any trace of him. Taking a deep breath, Light Grand Magus Ferguson suppressed his anger and said, "There's no need to look. Although I don't know how he did it, he's already left. Then what do we do next? Thunder Archmage Asa had been very respectful when facing Ferguson and asked hastily, "I want to know everything about this person, everything. The more detailed, the faster the better." Ferguson's voice held a rare note of anxiety as he turned his head to Asa and urged, "Understood, we'll get to it immediately." Asa responded. The elven sharpshooter Maxine finally understood why Ferguson had lost his composure. The sudden appearance of such a person who could turn the tables on the continent was a nightmarish influence for the Church of Light. Therefore, as an important figure of the Church of Light, Ferguson would certainly make use of all his resources to nip this possibility in the bud. "Good kid, you do have some tricks up your sleeve to be able to escape so miraculously." It was a good thing that Edwin had stopped his descent in time, otherwise he might have been caught up in the blast as well. Edwin couldn't help but praise Hanshaw when he saw that Hanshaw had miraculously escaped. "Master Edwin, this person has a grudge against the Calamity Church. Clarendon died at his hands, and even Johnny was killed by him." Belinda couldn't help but remind him when she saw Edwin's attitude take a 180-degree turn. "As long as he's willing to work with us, this kind of grudge is nothing. Everyone has a weakness. No matter what this person needs, we can provide it for him." In addition, Ferguson has already discovered his uniqueness today. The Radiant Church will definitely try to kill him at all costs. Ferguson will help us and get him to cooperate with us. Edwin laughed heartily and grabbed Belinda as they flew higher and higher, gradually leaving the mountain valley. There was a deep pond with a thick layer of ice 100 or so miles away from the mountain valley where the Rainbow Sickle mercenaries were. The water in the pond had all been frozen solid in the harsh winter, and the surface of the pond was as smooth as a mirror, shining brightly under the starlight. However, a streak of bloody light streaked through the sky and descended from the heavens, crashing down like a meteor. A violent force suddenly attacked, and the glaring bloody light bombarded the solid ice. A huge explosion came from the solid ice of the deep pool. The originally smooth mirror-like ice layer was suddenly blasted open with a huge hole in the ice. With the hole in the ice as the center, the surrounding ice cracked and melted into the pool of water below. A slender figure suddenly shot out from the hole in the ice in the span of a breath. A dripping wet Hanshaw flew out of the hole and immediately stopped on a piece of ice that hadn't cracked. He immediately sat down cross-legged and continued to adjust his breathing. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, Hanshaw opened his eyes and called out softly. Thin threads of dark red air floated out from the pores in his body, gradually dissipating as the cold wind blew past. In the dead of the winter night, Hanshaw stood up from his cross-legged position, changed into a new set of dry clothes, and soared into the sky once more. When he arrived in the boundless night sky, he got his bearings and quickly flew towards the Valley of Sunshine. The Ninefold Demonic Art. With all of Chu Kanglin's memories of demonic arts, Hanshaw could already skillfully use some secret magical arts now that he'd reached the Bloodlust realm. The demonic blood escape art was a type of demonic art for escaping. It originally required one to use one's blood essence to activate it and expend a bit of it to create a series of explosions. Then, the user would use the loud explosions and chaos to teleport their body away from danger. However, unless it was absolutely necessary, demonic cultivators definitely wouldn't use such a technique that consumed a large amount of blood essence. This was because once this technique was used, the caster would definitely suffer a great loss of vitality due to the excessive consumption of blood essence. This would put them in an extremely disadvantageous situation. However, this wasn't the case when he deployed the demonic blood disassembly this time. Having reached the Bloodlust realm, Hanshaw's body had naturally formed a murderous aura after a short period of bloodthirsty slaughter in the valley. He'd absorbed the fear and hatred of the mercenaries who died at his hands and gathered it all into his body. When this force grew stronger and stronger, Hanshaw felt that he was struggling to control his body. This was why he'd disregarded everything and sat down cross-legged in a dangerous place, immediately recovering his mind. In the process of stabilizing his mind, Han Shor suddenly woke up and realized that he was surrounded by many experts. At this moment, the negative energy that had been attached to the killing intent on his body was extremely chaotic and difficult to control. In this moment of crisis, Han Shor suddenly thought of the demonic blood escape art. A thought struck him and he forcefully used this energy as a catalyst, using it as the foundation to execute the demonic blood escape art. Not only did this cause an earth-shattering commotion, a few knights who were caught off guard instantly died tragically. Han Shor also calmly left the encirclement of the experts. This uncontrollable energy was also released by Han Shor, not harming him in the slightest. On the way back to the Valley of Sunshine, Han Shor miraculously discovered that the strength of his body had been tempered once again through this slaughter. Perhaps it was because the demonic blood escape art had used up the chaotic energy, leaving behind a small amount of pure energy that had miraculously fused with his magical yuan. It looks like I'll have to take risks if I want to improve a bit faster. When Han Shor sensed that his body's condition had changed due to this slaughter, he couldn't help but murmur ruefully. The sound of metal clashing suddenly traveled from not too far away and fell into Han Shor's ears. Han Shor, who was flying towards the Valley of Sunshine, started and began to carefully discern the surrounding mountain terrain. Having his brain expanded by magical yuan, Han Shor had a good understanding of the surrounding mountain terrain from the information Emily had obtained. When he paid close attention to his surroundings, he quickly found out where he was. He even knew where the sound was coming from. The sound of metal clashing came from where the House of Menlo was. Perhaps this matter had something to do with Trunks and the others. It's time to see the strength of those subordinates I've never met before. Han Shor murmured to himself as he changed his trajectory in the direction of the Valley of Sunshine and flew towards the area where the House of Menlo was. Chapter 218. The House of Menlo was located in a small mountain in the Valley of Sunshine. Many caves had been excavated into the belly of the mountain, intersecting with each other. Many shockingly powerful defensive measures had been set up inside. Han Shor flew through the air and stopped on top of an ancient tree more than 10 meters tall. His eyes looked towards the source of the noise. Thick smoke billowed out of the caves where the House of Menlo's troops were stationed. Some of the cave's entrances were ablaze. Many stone chambers had been excavated from the caves. The stone chambers were like individual rooms, with all sorts of living facilities within. Many of the stone chambers were even more luxurious than some of the shops in the Valley of Sunshine. It was very normal for a fire dragon to burst into flames as soon as it was thrown in. At the exit of the small mountain, a group of masked people moved quickly. Some of them were fire mags who chanted fire spells from time to time and spat out tongues of flame towards the cave entrance. This group of people moved nimbly and cooperated very well. The fire mags set the fire while the wind mags used the wind to fan the flames. A few archers wielded bows and arrows and forced the House of Menlo's men who had poked their heads out of the cave to go back in. The small mountain covered a large area. After the originally empty belly of the mountain was excavated, many caves and stone chambers of various sizes appeared. This group of troublemakers only targeted one corner of the mountain to destroy. Once people from other places came to help, they immediately retreated and hid in the surrounding bushes to conceal themselves. They were obviously very familiar with the surrounding terrain, and they were very good at changing places after a battle. Once they were discovered, they would immediately retreat while fighting, then make a big circle and come back from another place to wreak havoc for a while. Under normal circumstances, this group of troublemakers with only a few dozen people would very likely be consigned to eternal damnation when the first wave of attacks was discovered and they didn't retreat. However, the House of Menlo's situation was also very chaotic. This group of troublemakers was not the main force this time. A group of 400 to 500 bandits with messy clothing was the main target of the House of Menlo. For some unknown reason, these bandits had gathered around the House of Menlo and attacked any House of Menlo who came out of the cave. Both sides were locked in a fierce battle. Watching from afar for a while, Han Shoror didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw Trunks and his gang taking advantage of the chaotic battle to cause trouble everywhere. He hadn't expected that Trunks would actually have such talent in this area. The mission against the House of Menlo this time was originally just to arouse the House of Menlo's suspicions of the other factions. Who would have thought that the situation would develop like this? This was rather surprising to Han Shoror. Even more people were wearing shining armor and wielding sharp weapons as they returned from a distant path. From their clothing, Han Shoror could clearly tell that this group was also from the House of Menlo. There were about 500 to 600 of them, and each of them had an extraordinary aura. They should be the elite troops of the House of Menlo. The direction in which this group of people were returning was precisely where Trunks and his men were. Seeing that Trunks and his men hadn't discovered any possible danger, and were planning on causing more trouble, Han Shoror finally no longer stayed where he was and flew towards them. The sky was already beginning to brighten, and the stars had hidden themselves in the depths of the sky. It looked like it would be dawn soon. Just as Trunks was about to launch one last attack during the chaos, a black shadow landed in front of him with a whoosh. Trunks was startled, but when he realized that it was actually Han Shoror, he immediately let out a sigh of relief and said, "Why are you here? I was passing by here on the way and just happened to see the returning elites of the House of Menlo, so I was planning to come in from here." "Let's leave quickly." Han Shoror smiled faintly and didn't waste any words, explaining the current situation to Trunks. When he heard that the elites of the House of Menlo had returned, Trunks growled lowly and made a gesture towards the mercenaries in the distance. They were all masked fellows. When they saw Trunks' hand signal, they immediately understood. They did not gather together and leave. Instead, they became more and more scattered. Each and every one of them used the terrain to conceal themselves and gradually disappeared without a trace. "Let's go." Trunks didn't remain idle either. He turned his head and smiled at Han Shoror before burrowing into the dense thicket. The thick snow on the towering ancient trees blocked the light from above. It was difficult to walk through the dense thicket, but Trunks' figure wasn't obstructed at all. He led Han Shoror through many winding paths and left the House of Menlo's mountain in half an hour, appearing on the road to the Valley of Sunshine. They're all old mercenaries of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. When the old chief was still here, everything around the Valley of Sunshine was under our control. We're so familiar with the surrounding terrain that we can walk around with our eyes closed, so you don't have to worry about their safety. Trunks explained to Han Shoror once they left the House of Menlo's mountain. Han Shoror had already observed these people's actions from the high ground just now. They had great teamwork and were quite strong. Most of them had the strength of journeyman swordsmen or knights. There were also a few adept mags and swordsmen among them. There were also many with extraordinary archery skills. It looked like it was indeed as Trunks had said, they really were old mercenaries of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. With such a group of people, in addition to Trunks' planning and organization, the Soul Destroyer mercenary band's future path would be much smoother. "Right, what's going on your side? Why did a bandit band come to the House of Menlo?" Han Shoror couldn't help but ask as he recalled the situation just now. Trunks couldn't help but laugh at Han Shoror's question. He then explained, "When we were heading to the House of Menlo, we coincidentally saw this bandit band planning to rob a group of merchants. Before the battle, we pointed the way for these merchants and they followed our directions to hide in the House of Menlo. In the end, they alerted the House of Menlo and the bandits started fighting with the House of Menlo. We took advantage of the chaos to cause trouble everywhere. We originally thought that this group of bandits would be immediately defeated and we had already made plans to retreat. Who would have thought that the elites of the House of Menlo would be transferred out of the mountain tonight? We don't know what they were going to do." When the bandits saw that there weren't any more elites of the House of Menlo coming out to attack them, they arrogantly continued to attack. We also took advantage of the situation and stayed for a while longer. You saw what happened afterwards. So that's how it is. Are there many such bandit factions in the mountain range surrounding the Valley of Sunshine? Han Shoror nodded and asked with a smile. Of course. It's precisely because the Valley of Sunshine is in the middle of 3 countries that many large merchants want to do business in the Valley of Sunshine. That's why there are many bandit factions in the surrounding area. There are even 2 bandit bands with thousands of people. They were formed by wanted criminals from the 3 countries. The leaders of these 2 bandit bands are a man and a woman. The man is called Gustav, nicknamed the Butcher. He's an infamous wanted criminal in the Kossi Empire. He kills without batting an eyelid and is extremely cruel and cold-blooded. If a caravan were to run into his bandit band, it would truly be bad luck. He would plunder all the normal goods and take all the beauties. If he's in a bad mood, he'll kill the rest without leaving a single survivor. Back then, Florida worked with Gustav to frame our old chief, causing him to meet with misfortune. Even my little sister went missing with him. I'll kill this Gustav sooner or later. There's also a woman called Janet. This woman should be considered to have inherited her father's business. Her father was a bandit, her grandfather was a bandit, and her great-grandfather was also a bandit. They're from a famous bandit clan near the Valley of Sunshine. She was raised to be a bandit from birth. Although this woman isn't a good person, she still abides by the rules. When her bandit band runs into merchants, their lives are usually not in danger as long as they don't resist. Apart from the 2 largest bandit bands controlled by these 2, there are still a dozen or so bandit factions of various sizes in the surrounding Valley of Sunshine. It's just that the remaining ones are a bit smaller in scale and aren't as famous or powerful as these 2, Trunks slowly explained to Han Shoror. Han Shoror listened for a while and carefully inquired about the strength of those bandit bands before nodding. It looks like the glorious Tanai bandits and mercenaries complement each other. Whether it's bandits or mercenaries, they're both indispensable. What do you mean? Trunks asked. Without bandits, merchants won't need protection, and mercenaries won't be able to make money. Without mercenaries, merchants won't dare to come here to do business, and bandits won't have anything to steal. Therefore, it's completely reasonable for both bandits and mercenaries to exist in the Valley of Sunshine. With the strength of the 4 factions in the Valley of Sunshine, they should have the power to exterminate these bandits. However, perhaps it's because they understand this that they didn't make a move and allowed the bandits to exist. Han Shoror smiled faintly as he explained. Trunks chuckled when he heard Han Shoror's words. That's right, the old chief understood this long ago. I didn't think you'd figure it out so quickly as well. Nodding, Han Shoror looked at the sky and said, "Let's go, it's getting late. Let's hurry back to the Valley of Sunshine. I also want to go take a look." Ever since the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band had left, Han Shoror had always felt a voice calling out to him from afar. Han Shoror had originally thought that the little skull had run into danger again, but he realized that something wasn't right after a bit of careful observation. It wasn't until later on that Han Shoror focused his attention and carefully sensed that the voice was coming from the dark forest. This place wasn't very far from the dark forest, and the cemetery of death was in the dark forest. When Han Shoror realized that the call seemed to be coming from the dark forest, he immediately understood that the Earth Elite zombie had successfully broken out of the ground. However, due to the boundary of the cemetery of death, he couldn't use his senses to find Han Shoror, so he could only passively send out signals. Chapter 219. Han Shoror and Trunks returned to the Valley of Sunshine one after the other. Gilbert, Emily, and Phoebe had already returned to the shop with the place of extreme water. They were anxiously waiting for Han Shoror, afraid that something had happened to Han Shoror. "Are you all right?" Who would have thought that old fellow Ferguson would also be in the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band? It's a good thing that his main target wasn't us. Otherwise Gilbert and we wouldn't have been able to return so easily. Emily sighed with lingering fear when she saw that Han Shoror had returned safely. Ferguson seems to care quite a bit about this grandson of his. The Rainbow Sickle mercenary band suffered heavy casualties tonight. They definitely won't take this lying down. Let's be careful. Han Shoror understood that the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band wasn't weak. The reason why the valley had been so chaotic this time was because the experts weren't in Tanai. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to cause such a ruckus so easily. What happened afterwards? Phoebe and the other two had left early and didn't know what had happened afterwards. When she saw that Han Shoror had returned safely, Phoebe couldn't help but ask. Nothing important. I took advantage of the chaos to escape after you guys left. Han Shoror responded. Heartfelt calls traveled from the distant dark forest and circled around Han Shoror's heart. Seeing that there wasn't much to explain, Han Shoror couldn't hold back his curiosity and immediately said, there shouldn't be any problems during the day. Everyone has been busy all night, let's rest a bit before the sky brightens. Han Shoror hastily returned to his room after speaking and chanted an incantation. The loyal little skull appeared in front of him, bone dagger in hand. After giving the order, Han Shoror took out the magic staff that led to the Cemetery of Death and assembled the magical formation. He hastily walked into the formation and activated it with his mental strength. A dazzling white light flashed by, and the scene changed drastically in an instant. Walking out of the main hall of the Cemetery of Death, one could see mounds of earth rising from the ground as far as the eye could see. Under the dusky sky, dense earth elements continuously gathered at the place of extreme earth. Like the undulating waves of the sea, the ground trembled slightly. Mounds rose and fell one after another, and the hard soil became as soft as sand. In the middle of the deep hole, the soil was constantly churning, as if there was a big loach rolling around inside. The Cemetery of Death was protected by a special boundary. Anyone who wanted to enter or exit the Cemetery of Death would have to open it with the Eye of Darkness that Han Shoror possessed. As soon as the Earth Elite zombie had successfully emerged, it had instinctively searched for traces of Han Shoror. It just so happened that the Valley of Sunshine where Han Shoror resided wasn't too far from the Dark Forest. Therefore, when it sensed Han Shoror's presence, it immediately wanted to approach Han Shoror. Unfortunately, it was blocked by the special boundary of the Cemetery of Death and had no way of leaving. Therefore, it impatiently stirred up the earth, seeming to want to use its special ability to leave through the earth. However, it was obvious that this mysterious place, the Cemetery of Death, did indeed have its own special and mysterious aspects. As the favored child of the earth, the Earth Elite zombie, who could move through the earth at will, was actually unable to break through this restriction. This was enough to prove that the Cemetery of Death, as the holy land of necromancers, truly lived up to its name of mystery. Come out. When Han Shoror appeared, he immediately called out softly. As soon as he finished speaking, a yellowish shadow suddenly broke out from the center of the sand and stood straight in front of Han Shoror. It was still the same ordinary zombie warrior, but its appearance had undergone tremendous changes after undergoing the refinement of the demonic arts. First of all, the originally dark green skin on its face had turned yellowish-brown, and its entire body was covered in an oily yellow armor. Faint light flowed from the surface of the armor, and dense earth chi overflowed from it. This oily yellow armor had been slowly formed after the Earth Elite zombie had absorbed the earth chi from the place of extreme earth, along with some special materials that Han Shoror had mixed with his body. The armor covered his entire body, and the toughness of his body had greatly increased compared to before. He could use the element of earth to form all kinds of attacks, and he could also use the earth escape technique to conceal his tracks, or suddenly attack others. The Earth Elite zombie was about 1.8 meters tall and had an ordinary face. At this moment, it opened its ghastly mouth, revealing a somewhat simple and honest smile as it stared at Han Shoror in a daze. Like Little Skull, although the Earth Elite zombie had a soul, it couldn't directly communicate with Han Shoror. It could only communicate through the mysterious connection between the two. The Earth Elite zombie looked at Han Shoror with a grin and gestured with its large hands. A hill on the ground slowly flattened, and the entire area was restored to its original state. Alright, I know your abilities, so you don't need to show off. It was like a naughty child, eager to show off its abilities. Han Shoror understood that the Earth Elite zombie had just formed, and its intelligence was still very low. It needed to be constantly instilled with knowledge in order for it to understand more things. The Earth Elite zombie's lips moved as soon as Han Shoror's words fell. He flipped over and leapt into the center of his hiding place. The ground then trembled lightly as his figure reappeared. However, when the Earth Elite zombie reappeared, its 2 hands were holding 3 throbbing blurry shadows. The 3 yin demons have formed as well. Han Shoror was astonished, and in his joy, he immediately activated his magical yuan and shot a black light towards the 3 blurry shadows. He opened his mouth and yelled, "By my command, yin demons, return to your positions." As soon as the black light hit the 3 blurry shadows, a swirling mass of jet black mist continuously appeared from the 3 blurry shadows. Then, the originally blurry shadows gradually became clear. Long tails, sharp fangs, and the size of a fierce wild monkey. However, they all had 2 sharp curved horns, a pair of bat-like wings, and a pair of dark green evil eyes that shone with a frightening light. These were the forms of the 3 yin demons. After the 3 yin demons gradually became clear, they flew out from the Earth Elite zombies' 2 hands and shuttled through the air like lightning. Their forms changed from solid to incorporeal, and from incorporeal to solid again. They were faintly discernible in the air as they changed their forms at will. Their mouths emitted soul-stealing, joyful howls. The 3 yin demons circled around Han Shoror once, and with a thought from Han Shoror, they entered the back of his neck into Han Shoror's body, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Then, Han Shoror smiled faintly, and with a sway of his body, 4 identical Han Shorors appeared out of thin air. Apart from Han Shoror's original body, the other 3 Han Shorors were transformed from yin demons. It was truly mysterious and unfathomable. For a moment, the Earth Elite zombie didn't know what was going on. It was obvious that he was confused. He stood there motionless, blinking his eyes as he foolishly looked at Han Shoror. After a while, the Earth Elite zombie grinned foolishly, and with a movement of his thick body, he instantly arrived at the position of Han Shoror's real body on the far left. He even extended his left hand and pointed at Han Shoror, meaning, "I found you." There was a mysterious connection between the two, so Han Shoror didn't find it strange that the Earth Elite zombie was able to recognize the real one. Seeing the Earth Elite zombie pointing at him foolishly, Han Shoror's thoughts moved again, and the 3 yin demons turned into fake bodies, turning into 3 rays of black light and returning to his body. He continuously used the 3 yin demons to transform into fake bodies in an extremely short amount of time, appearing out of thin air and then quickly disappearing. After doing this a few dozen times, Han Shoror was finally able to quickly and skillfully grasp this secret art. At first, it took the Earth Elite zombie a while to recognize Han Shoror, but when Han Shoror repeatedly did this, the Earth Elite zombie was able to rely on the connection between the two to quickly point out the real one as soon as Han Shoror's fake body appeared. He thought that Han Shoror was playing an interesting game with him, and tirelessly carried out the operation to find Han Shoror. He didn't feel bored or tired at all, and kept grinning foolishly. He didn't have the coldness and fierceness that a zombie should have, which made Han Shoror a bit worried that he wouldn't be able to grow quickly. Han Shoror wasn't the zombie driver from Chu Kanglan's memories, so he naturally couldn't bring a zombie warrior with him to various places and occasions. Therefore, after some consideration, Han Shoror decided to send the Earth Elite zombie to the space and time he came from. Han Shoror wasn't worried about the Earth Elite zombie's strength. Having experienced the secret method of demonic refinement, the Earth Elite zombie could skillfully use the Yuan energy of Earth, and would certainly become a very competent helper. However, since the Earth Elite zombie had just broken out of the ground, it seemed that because he hadn't experienced the tempering of a great battle, he was a bit naive and honest, and needed to grow quickly. In the plane that the little skull had always stayed in, there seemed to be powerful existences everywhere. Even Han Shoror didn't know how tyrannical the little skull's strength was, but even in that plane, he would encounter enemies that he needed to avoid. It seemed that letting the Earth Elite zombie return home in glory would be a good idea. "Let me introduce you to a friend. He has my aura on him, you'll definitely like him." Han Shoror thought for a moment, and said to the Earth Elite zombie with a smile. Then, using the connection between him and the little skull, Han Shoror chanted a magic incantation. When the little skull appeared in place, the zombie and the skeleton stared at each other silently. The purple demon eye of the little skull was shining brightly, and it seemed to be very interested in the existence of the Earth Elite zombie. It took the initiative to walk to the Earth Elite zombie's side, and stretched out its bony claw to pat the Earth Elite zombie's shoulder. It used its other bony claw to beat the bones in front of the Earth Elite zombie's chest, and gestured to Han Shoror. The meaning seemed to be, "I'll protect him, don't worry." Chapter 220. Both of them had Han Shoror's blood essence. They instinctively felt close to each other, and Han Shoror could feel that feelings were slowly growing between them. The little skull and the Earth Elite zombie, who were looking at each other, seemed to be slowly communicating about something. After a while, they both looked at Han Shoror with eager eyes. "All right, I'll send you back." The two sent the message that they were leaving together. Han Shoror responded with a smile, and with an incantation, the little skull and the Earth Elite zombie disappeared from the Cemetery of Death. After the two left, the Cemetery of Death regained its peace. The ground of the place of extreme Earth was still flat, and the Yin Demon Cave had stopped operating because of the Yin Demon's emergence. Looking around and seeing that there was nothing to worry about, Han Shoror made a trip to the valley where the dwarfs lived. "Han, why did you think of coming here?" As soon as he arrived at the dwarfs' valley, these simple dwarfs expressed their deep enthusiasm. Along the way, there were people constantly asking him friendly questions. After Han Shoror's last visit, the dwarfs had received a large amount of food and daily necessities. Now, their elderly and children were all wearing thick cotton-padded clothes to ward off the cold, and there were warm stoves to bake them. With enough food to quench their hunger, even the depths of winter no longer seemed frightening. Along the way, Han Shoror could see from the dwarfs' faces that they were brimming with satisfaction and contentment. When these dwarfs saw Han Shoror appear, they all expressed gratitude and welcomed him, yelling to each other to spread the news of Han Shoror's arrival. "Uncle Han, this is for you." On the way to the center of the valley, a 6 or 7-year-old dwarf child holding a skewer of tanghulu walked up to Han Shoror, holding up a glossy roasted meat, and said in his tender voice, "Thank you, good child." Bending down, Han Shoror touched the dwarf child, who was only a few dozen centimeters tall, and said with a smile, casually taking the roasted meat from him. Some of the adult dwarfs around him showed kind smiles, and the atmosphere seemed very harmonious. It seemed that they had a very good impression of Han Shoror. When Han Shoror arrived at the center of the village and saw the familiar dwarf warrior Bennett, as well as the old dwarf village chief Calvin, Han Shoror smiled and asked, "Elder, how have you been lately?" "Dear Han, with you, this winter is no longer cold. Everyone will have warm clothes and enough food. No one will starve to death in winter." Chief Calvin had a gratified expression on his face as he faced Han Shoror and expressed his gratitude to Han Shoror with dwarven etiquette. Although Han Shoror hadn't helped these simple dwarfs completely out of good intentions in the beginning, he realized that these stubborn dwarfs were actually very easy to get along with after coming into contact with them. They were unbelievably generous to those they acknowledged as friends. Unknowingly, Han Shoror had gained their friendship, but some of their actions and methods had also gained Han Shoror's favor. This made Han Shoror, who had originally intended to make use of them, truly treat them as trustworthy friends. "That's good, that's good. If there's anything else you need, you can take advantage of this trip to let me know. I'm about to return to the human world again and can help you bring something along." Han Shoror maintained a kind smile on his face as he spoke unhurriedly to Calvin. Waving his hands, Calvin said emotionally, "No need, we'll be able to get through this winter easily. When spring comes, we'll need to use our own efforts in exchange for more returns. You know, we're a hardworking race. Children need to be raised from a young age and can't be allowed to develop lazy habits." Nodding, Han Shoror said understandingly, "So that's how it is. Right, I've come this time because I want you to help me forge some weapons and armor. Would that be convenient for you, Elder?" "Han, you're treating us like strangers. We're friends, how could we not? The wild beasts don't come out during the winter, and there are very few places to move about in the dark forest. Forging weapons is our hobby, And it's a very interesting activity to forge some weapons when we're free. There's no problem at all. Calvin didn't hesitate at all and immediately agreed readily. He even looked quite happy. Really, Han, we've been thinking about how to repay you during this time. Now that you want us to forge weapons, we don't have to worry about it anymore. Bennett laughed heartily as he described their sincerity to Han Shaw. It looked like these dwarfs were still grateful for the daily necessities he'd given them. These dwarfs weren't willing to take advantage of friends that they truly acknowledged. Therefore, they'd been searching for ways to repay Han Shaw. Han Shaw was a bit embarrassed after Bennett's words. Han Shaw had harbored malicious intentions from the very beginning when he'd approached these dwarfs. However, the dwarf's kindness and simplicity made him feel ashamed of his inferiority sometimes. Let's not do anything for now because I haven't decided what type of weapon I want to forge. When I've decided what weapon I need, I'll bring some raw materials with me next time, Han Shaw said. After leaving the dwarf's valley, Han Shaw didn't linger in the dark forest and returned to the glorious Tanai through the cemetery of death. Putting away the magic staff, Han Shaw walked out of the room and discovered that the entire shop was empty. He was a bit stunned and didn't know where they'd all gone. Han Shaw had given all the authority over the Soul Destroyer mercenary band to Trunks, while Phoebe was in charge of handling the treasures. Emily was in charge of keeping an eye on the messy affairs of the Dark Mantle organization, while Gilbert played a protective role in protecting Phoebe and Emily. The sky was like a burning cloud and the sunset was bright red, indicating that it was already evening. During the day, the soldiers of the Cairo mercenary band were everywhere in the glorious Tanai. The guards of the Valley of Sunshine's merchants were also patrolling the streets. Therefore, Han Shaw wasn't too worried about their safety. Seeing that he was the only one left in the shop, Han Shaw took out the thick tome of necromancy he'd obtained from the Cemetery of Death and began to slowly study it. During the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band's trip last night, the long-lost canopy of necromancy had been unleashed and had played an enormous role. If it wasn't for Light Grand Magus Ferguson's timely arrival, the dark creatures within the range of the canopy of necromancy would have continued to wreak havoc and display extraordinary battle strength. Even after absorbing the Calamity Church's Archmage Clarendon's memories, Han Shaw didn't have any memories of the canopy of necromancy. He didn't even have the corpse resurrection spell that he'd previously grasped. In other words, this magic tome from the Cemetery of Death was the crystallization of necromancy magic. It contained a large amount of necromancy knowledge, including some necromancy spells that had been lost in the past. These things were extremely useful to Han Shaw. After obtaining Clarendon's memories, Han Shaw's understanding of necromancy magic had already reached the level of an archmage. He could understand many of the difficult and specialized sentences in the tome and didn't need to ask Fanny for more knowledge. Time always passed so quickly when one was studying magic. The sky had completely darkened in the blink of an eye. Light footsteps outside roused Han Shaw from his reverie. With a thought, Han Shaw clearly saw the newcomers through the surveillance of the 3 yin demons. It turned out that Trunks and Gilbert had returned together. "Brian, I have good news for you. I think you'll be very happy to hear it." Trunks had a joyful expression as he spoke to Han Shaw. Starting, Han Shaw was surprised and asked, "What good news? Do you remember Odysseus and the other 5 who adventured with you in the dark forest? What is it? When I came back today, I saw the 6 of them enter the Valley of Sunshine. Odysseus and the others have extraordinary strength and deep feelings for you. Our mercenary band has just been established and we need strong and reliable people like them. If you invite them, I think they might be willing to join us." Han Shaw couldn't help but say happily when he heard Trunks' words, "This is good news indeed." Odysseus and Gordon are both senior swordsmen, and there's also the water adept mage Aphrodite, a journeyman thunder mage, and the female elf archer Nia. Their strength isn't weak at all. If they can join us, I think it will be a great addition to our mercenary band. It looks like our luck is quite good, hehe. They seem to be protecting a merchant this time. I spoke to them and they said they'll come tomorrow to catch up with you. I think there shouldn't be any problems." Trunks smiled. Han Shoror, who'd been listening to Trunks speak, suddenly furrowed his brow and looked at a large tree not far away. He said lowly, "Mr. Edwin, since you're here, let's talk in the yard." You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.